All right, it is 7 o'clock, and I'd like to call the meeting of the 2024-2025 Budget Committee to order. Chair Traeger is absent tonight. She's dialed in from a train right now, so I'll be at least getting us started here this evening, and welcome to all of our Budget Committee members and staff here tonight for our first Budget Committee meeting. Next thing I want to just briefly chat on is I think everybody other than Dr. Helms here. And first of all, welcome Dr. Helms to the Budget Committee, and appreciate you stepping up on very short notice to help us with our Budget Committee and a very short vacancy here. The next thing I want to talk about is just our procedures and our rules. Each one of you in your packet had the decorum agreement for our Budget Committee, and I trust each one of you have read it. And I'm not anticipating any issues there, so I'm not going to go into that too deeply. We've all worked together for the most part, and have had wonderful meetings before. So with that being said, I'll move to the next item, which is we're going to elect a chair and a vice chair for our Budget Committee. And just to preface that, that's generally citizens members for those two positions. It's not board members. That's how we've always done it in the past. So with that being said, I will, I know this is awkward to ask and solicit for folks who might be interested with or want to nominate folks for a chair position. We'll start with the chair position, then we'll move to the vice chair position next. But I'm open to taking any nominations for the chair for our Budget Committee.
I would like to move to have Wally as chair.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to have Wally as chair. Now, I'd like to also entertain any other nominations. So maybe we won't move in second, but we'll just kind of throw that out as the next person who might want to be nominated, or other nominations too. Is there any other nominations for chair? Okay.
I would like to say I'd be happy to do that, but I do not have a copy of the agenda.
Okay.
So if somebody can help me out on that,
Yeah,
I'll
I'll help you out, Wally, no problem. So we do have the standing motion that has been moved and seconded to have Wally Lehrman act as our Budget Committee chair for this year. Any other discussion? Okay, go ahead, Debbie.
Hillary.
We're trying to get her promoted to
Okay.
panelist.
I'll move on. Wally.
Yes.
Max.
Here.
Creighton.
Yes.
Ginny.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
Derek.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Josh.
Yep.
Owen.
Yes.
Phil.
Yes.
And Jennifer Traeger voted via text yes.
Okay, and then is Hillary dialed in yet?
Yes.
Just getting moved over to panelist.
Okay, I'd like to wait and just make sure we can capture her vote as well. Sorry for the pause here.
Here I am. I approve.
Great, thanks, and Hillary, thank you for joining remotely, really appreciate it. Okay, so we have a unanimous selection, so Wally is chair, and I'll pass over to you to take nominations for vice chair.
Okay, I take nominations. By the way, thank you, Aaron. Take nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Dr. Helms, vice chair.
Okay, we have Dr. Helms. Anybody else? All right, I don't hear any, so is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved in second. Any further discussion?
This is great choice.
Debbie?
Hillary.
Yes.
Wally.
Yes.
Max.
Yep.
Yes.
Ginny.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
Derek.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Josh.
Yep.
Owen.
Yes.
Phil.
Yes.
Jennifer, yes for Creighton. All in favor.
All right, thank you. Do we have a copy of the agenda?
I'm going to get that to you
Okay,
right now.
thank you.
Okay, the next item is the superintendent's budget message.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
All right, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I think you have in front of you a printed copy. We'll also include this into board book in a second. I won't read it word for word, but I will get some of the details out there. I think it's important for us to at least have a place to start. So starting down on the history and the budget development, as you all well know, late in the spring, the district learned that they would be short in their revenue and able to be able to cover all expenditures. We have actually tonight in attendance with us Jackie Olson from OASBO, who did a huge amount of that work to help us get to a place where we could actually understand what the deficit would be. I was brought on then by the school board here to help work with the district and to try to get us to the place that we are tonight. We found out at that point that we needed to cut $1.2 million by the end of this fiscal year, the 23-24 school year, in the last few months, and also to carve out 8.8 for the upcoming year. Some of the reasons, and there are lots of things that you'll get through. You'll get a lot more information in the future, of course, when you go through and see some of the, when you see the audit report coming out in the spring of next year. But let me give you some of the ideas so we can understand kind of how we've built this budget and why it matters going forward. First of all, we had missed revenue projections in the 23-24 adopted budget from last year. Our extended ADMW finally catching up with more realistic enrollment numbers post-COVID. Now let me explain extended ADMW very quickly. So we go on a 2-year rolling average, which means that between the 2 years, the last year and this year, the state will fund you on the higher of those two numbers. During COVID, one of the immediate things they did was to freeze our numbers at the numbers we had because we didn't know how many students would come, how many would disappear, and so we lived on those numbers for a couple of years. I know it was talked about in previous budget meetings that there would be some kind of a cliff because those numbers would change. We're continuing to see that change, and that differential was not planned for quite as highly. I think many of us in the state of Oregon often thought that we would have more students return, but we're down about 35,000 kids statewide. So the students have not returned. And so that part of this, now we're past those rolling averages and we're into a far more realistic number. Now we will be funded on the higher of the two numbers, either this year's enrollment or next year's enrollment, so those numbers will balance out. And your revenues will continue to be projected throughout the year next year. But that's one of the issues. The other one was an over-reliance on federal stimulus dollars, otherwise known as the ESSER funds. So anything that was in that fund, including personnel, if you had not made a plan to not fund it out of ESSER when that disappeared, then you would find yourself without that. So we actually, the district apparently had budgeted a much higher amount than was actually going to be available, that those dollars had already been spent. There are also an addition of more positions than could be afforded with that district's revenue. And then there were also overspending of budgeted amounts in multiple areas in the budget, in both personnel and non-personnel areas. In order to realize that 1.2 emergency reduction that we had to do, we did negotiate with our labor associations. We were going to have to immediately cut positions near the end of the year, which is pretty traumatic. And so fortunately, we were able to work out an ability to do furlough days for the end of this school year. And that, for that, first of all, I want to thank them again. I've done that multiple times, but it is important to realize that that $1.2 million savings came on the backs of people who work for a living and give their everything to the district every day. So we were fortunate to be able to do that. Additionally, then, as we go forward, we built this budget with a few things in mind. First of all, we did apply for and did receive the tax anticipation note to help us with our cash flow to be able to cover our expenses through the end of this year and forward until November, when local property taxes will then help us carry through the rest of the year. So it's important to understand that you have to have cash on hand in order to be able to pay people. So rubber checks they don't fly now and they didn't fly before. So it's important to realize you had to have some money in the bank, and you'll see some of that tonight. The details of my esteemed colleague, Kim Dowd, will go through more of those. So those 8.8 million in reductions, this is kind of how we got there. I want to see more or less what the pictures of what those reductions include. First of all, you have to repay that TAN by December. Okay, so it's a very short timeline. So you're going to get those revenues in November, and boom, you're going to pay off the rest of it in December. So that's 3.9 million right there of what I'll call a reduction, but that room had to be made in the budget in order to cover that. We had to increase our unemployment budget. There are lots of new things around unemployment and laws. We don't have to go into the details of those, but we have budgeted about 1.4 million in retirement fund, so we'll have that available to us. Is that the right number?
Unemployment funds.
Unemployment fund, yeah,
Yes.
because we're self-insured for unemployment, so when people go on unemployment, we actually pay that, right? It's not coming from another source. So that's increased significantly from where all districts had budgeted unemployment. That's not just for this district and not just because of the cuts and furloughs, but it's actually due to just an overall thing. We've got paid leave Oregon and other things that are going to cost us more money.
So question on that.
Yeah,
Do we not pay unemployment then for the employees?
We
We-
do not pay tax. We
Unemployment
do not
tax.
pay an unemployment tax. We do charge an internal service fund. We're going to talk about that in
Okay.
detail. Thank you.
All right.
yep, that's a good question. We have budgeted for $1 million in contingency. As there are unexpected needs, things happen, you know, HVAC systems go down, 16 kindergartners show up, whatever, you've got to have a few dollars in that reserve fund. And we felt it prudent to put $1 million in contingency for that. And then also we have associated costs in the cost of living increases and step increases for all staff, and that accounted for about 2.5 million. So you have to plan ahead for those regular costs. So when looking at that 8.8, then you kind of come together with those pieces. In order to get there, of course, we had to conduct a reduction in force, which we let go of about 60 employees and also created 40 movements, right? So we reassigned people to different buildings and different job, possibly based upon what they would qualify for. That has been going on in the last few weeks. There are still some changes that are happening as people make other decisions, but by and large, we've affected about 20-some% of our staff in some way or another. And it's a pretty significant change. We are also estimating an enrollment decline of about 50 students, and that's only due to the difference between the number of students who just graduated last week and the number of incoming kindergartners. Now, we won't know how many kindergartners we will have until partway through the first or second week when they all start showing up. So the way we estimate kindergartners is we say this year's kindergarten numbers we'll just use for next year's kindergarten numbers. They could be lower, they could be higher, but we don't really have any other way to estimate those. And kindergarten roundup, you get a few, but it's a little bit like an RSVP for a wedding. We don't know if it's about 60% are actually going to get that done ahead of time, right? So that's how those are estimated. So those adjustments will happen throughout the year as you go, but we just wanted to highlight that we're not losing students as people are angry. We're just losing students because there's a differential in the number that left and the number that are coming in. So those are important to realize. These lowering enrollment numbers are seen across the state, so this is not related to Silver Falls. Again, this is a general trend, and so as you're budgeting forward in the next years, you'll want to pay attention to what those numbers look like. I do have a recommendation in here to do a population research study so you'll have an idea. They're only good for about 2 years. You know, they might project 10, but nobody knows what's going to happen, you know, even next week. So it's important to keep that updated so you'll have that piece. The budget that we are presenting tonight is very tight. It's very tight. I just want to reiterate that 400 times. And the reason for that is we tried to cut as few people as possible and as many of the things we could, and at the same time, you know, allow some flexibility in that contingency in case there's an emergency. But we have really gone after a lot of things, and it's been very hard. You've heard, you know, plenty of public testimony on that, and no cuts were good cuts. Right? We had to make those selections. So just understand that the budget is tight, and by sticking to this tight budget in the future, it allows the district to grow back sooner than it would if you continue to try to go down that road. Looking ahead, so declining enrollment, increasing costs, it's also important to remember that you will not add back all the positions that you lost because those were outside of your revenue that was going to come in general, right? So you were overstaffed based upon the revenue you would normally get. You may in the future wish to consider an operating levy that also competes, however, with a general obligation bond for construction, so that you have to weigh what that would look like for your taxpayers, and that's an important thing to think about, right? Those are important things. You'll go through a process in looking at those and see what you have for the ability. But other than that, you will just have fewer people because that's what you can afford. Until there's more revenue in the system from the state of Oregon, we are all going to live within this reduced amount. I also wanted to talk about a couple other things. So in the past, and I've heard some questions about budgeting on a per school basis, and I will tell you that that's how things get lost in the budget, because separating them by school makes it so you have to go line and then you flip 20 pages in that same line and flip 20 pages. It's very difficult to keep track of your expenses when you're doing it separated by school. You budget by a district, you get money by district. You don't get money by school, right? So it's important to do those things. You can look at what your costs may be per school, but those things are actually not relevant because there's a differential between what they offer at Central Howell because of the size, or at Prattam, and at the high school or at the middle school. Right? They're just different. Robert Frost is different than Evergreen, and they have different services, sizes, all those things matter. So I think it's important to just keep that in mind. So we have a district level budget, and we can certainly look at how we put them in there, but it's from a monitoring the budget standpoint, the best practice is to keep it at a district level. So, question?
Yeah, so I have heard multiple times that from principals themselves that said one of the reasons we got into this situation was instead of having 8 separate set of eyes looking at their individual budgets and kind of catching things, it went to a centralized thing, which made it, I guess, less checks and balances.
Mm-hmm.
So I trust your expertise, but I've heard this from multiple people and principals, administrators who I trust, that they said the moment we got lost their site-based budgeting kind of opened up this door for less oversight.
Yeah, I've heard that too, and I think there are other processes that have to be put into place at the central office, and those are some of the things that's still sort of missing.
I'd have to agree with those sentiments.
Yeah.
For years, we had site-based budgeting, and it worked great. The principals had ownership of the budget. They had eyes on the budget. They had incentives to not overspend and carry over. And for the board, it was quite easy to see where the spending was going and who's going over. You could ask specific questions to understand what's really going on there. So I'm personally a huge advocate of site-based budgeting.
Well, you can do a site-based budgeting when it comes to the things like the 200s through 600s, the things that are the stuff they spend on. That's separate. That's actually easy to do.
And that's how we actually handle it.
Right, but from the staffing standpoint, it gets weird because let's say I've got 4 positions and I can afford them because I have all brand new teachers, and now somebody retires. I need that 4th teacher. I bring in somebody who's got 18 years of experience. All of a sudden, my budget's blown. So do I reduce a teacher? Do I not? Do I move somebody around? So on a personnel side of things, that's where
So the
things
way
get
we
lost.
handled that is we took a base cost, it was an average, and it always averaged out, whether you had an experienced person or a new person.
Right. Well, that's something that you guys can all discuss with your next superintendent. We're budgeting this on a district-wide for this one.
And for this year, I don't think you have a choice other than.
We don't, yep. I also want you to be, to notice that we're talking about fiscal year also 26 and 27. We're looking ahead a year and 2 years. PERS costs will go up, so your PERS bonds will expire. That means that your percentage points that you've been buying down, because you had a PERS, what's called a side account, you had a PERS bond that helps buy down some of your percentage points. Those will expire, so those percentage points will go up. And of course, we don't have any control over what PERS will do to increase anyway. So as you're looking forward into budgeting in the next 2 fiscal years, and that's why I'm putting on the radar now, that this is something you're going to have to watch because those costs will go up, and we will get up to 38 to 40 cents on the dollar for your associated payroll costs. That's a lot. Okay, so that's just something to pay attention to. I want to put that in here. This is something that we also talked about at the WDSD this year, looking ahead 2 years. Let's be ready for this, or even a year. So we're not quite sure when those PERS bonds will expire. Part of it is that employee salaries have gone up, so we've actually spent our PERS bonds probably faster than we had planned on when we did them 10 years ago, because you kind of amortize how long you think they're going to last, but costs have increased. And that's not a blame on anyone, that's the way this has worked. So I want to highlight that you're going to want to watch your PERS costs in the next couple of years, because that will take a percentage hit on your budget. It's also important, and this is probably goes without saying, but I'm going to say it out loud anyway. It is important that you spend up to and not over the budget that we put out. And this is going to be one of the big things. And I'm actually not saying that tongue in cheek. It's really important to stick to this. This will help you get to a better place if you can avoid, and you may or may not be able to avoid a TAN next year, but if you're able to, for whatever reason, we've talked about the property sale, whatever those things that put into your reserves, the faster that you're not having to borrow money and pay it back, the faster you get back to some sense of normalcy and more balance. So I will make the plead to please stay within that, ask those questions, and get ready for it. And then finally, I just wanted to thank the board for their confidence in me in doing this work. I want to thank these individuals, all these individuals at the table. So Jackie Olson, of course, was our big expert, but you know, Kim Dowd moving into a brand new position and doing her old position and learning all these things newly. Debbie keeping us all in line, because that's always necessary, refereeing these yahoos. Mr. Bush here with all of the work with our associations and going through the RIF process and everything else has been amazing. And Brandon also launching into a whole bunch of things, making decisions and helping us with the special education. So this team here has been amazing, and I do want to just give them public credit. There have been thousands of unlogged hours that have gone into trying to get us to where we are today in the most humane way possible. So I want to thank this whole table publicly. And that's all I have for this, unless you have questions.
All right, questions for Dr. Morlock? I have one.
Yeah.
The other night, I know it's only been a couple days, but you announced that there's going to be a retirement incentive. Has there been much response to that?
So the incentive was signed that night, being furlough week. They're not sending that out until
Okay.
next week. So, but we do have the signed copy of that. I don't believe it went out this week.
No.
Okay.
But I can probably send it out.
We can go ahead and send
We
it?
can send it out
Perfect.
to members tomorrow and SFEA.
Perfect,
On their timing.
perfect.
Yeah.
All right,
So,
thank you.
yes, but they did sign it after that meeting. Very, very pleased to see that, so.
I think Hillary has her hand up too.
Oh, yep.
Where's this? Oh,
She has her
Yes,
Hillary.
yeah, Hillary.
Thank you. I'm not used to this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, hi, sorry, guys. I'm in Montana, but I didn't want to miss this exciting meeting. So, Dr. Morlock, you said it was very important that we stay within the bounds of this budget. And I asked this question earlier today, and I know probably nobody has had time to consider it, but according to the reports that we're looking at, we have stayed inside the budget. In fact, we've come under the budget for at least 21, 22, and then 22, 23. So what am I missing? Does this, does the 8.8 million, shortfall is that reported somewhere else and doesn't appear on these budgets? Or, because otherwise it's kind of hard to know what we're supposed to be tightening up on and staying within, because it looks, by all accounts, as we've been doing that.
Right, that's a great question, and we'll get into some more detail because we did actually also include the statement of revenues and expenditures from the board meeting on Monday. But just generally, I want to consider it, and we'll actually have a slide in a little while. I don't want to steal all the thunder from Kim. But in that slide, you will see the continual decline of your ending fund balance. And so when your ending fund balance becomes zero or less than zero, when you have fewer dollars there, that becomes a cash flow problem. So this part of this TAN, part of this loan that we're taking out that we have to repay by December, that's a cash flow problem. So when you don't have money in the bank to do that, so over the last 4 years, that ending fund balance has, the reserves have been spent down as part of the budgeting. So it's been in the budget process. So you've seen that actually over the last 3 years. So as you continue to spend that down on whatever those needs might be, that's how you end up there. Additionally, the reductions that have to be made in terms of the staffing also came because if you have staffing that were being paid for by one-time dollars, the one time that those aren't there any longer, those staff positions either have to be incorporated into your budget or they have to be eliminated. So some of the eliminations are just around, we don't have that revenue source anymore. And then going back to your other question, it looks like it now, and we'll talk about it in a little bit just because the other sources, that TAN, the tax anticipation note for this year, the estimated 23-24, includes that 3.816 that came in for the TAN. So it was not at that level before. Now, with that $4 million injection, essentially we have additional dollars for cash flow. But that's why that reserve, that's why that ending fund balance that becomes your beginning fund balance is so critical, which is why we've budgeted at least $1 million to start with. But that's actually what's happened. So over the last several years, and there's a very stark slide that we'll see in a little bit, the spending of your reserves put you into a situation where now you had to borrow money, that now in turn requires additional cuts at the district. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it would be nice if if it were much clearer, because you are repeating the exact same message we received last year at the budget committee meeting, that the budget was very tight, we had to stay on budget. And, you know, we left that meeting going, well, it's gonna be a tight year, and then we didn't hear anything until the news broke. So it's just, it's a little nerve-wracking as a community member who's being held accountable by our neighbors, when it sort of feels like we don't have all the numbers in front of us, or if we do, I'm not seeing them. So I still don't know where in the documents that I've been presented with, that I can point to and say, you know, because I feel like as a representative of this committee, I need to be able to go out and explain to my neighbors, okay, this is what happened, and this is how we're gonna avoid it. Because if I can't explain it, then we're just gonna, you know, we're gonna keep having this, I fear that we're gonna keep repeating the problem.
Right, and simply, you spent down your reserves over 3 years at a speed that you should not have.
Right, and where is that shown on these documents?
In each one of your budget books, and we'll show you the slide in a second, but in each one of your budget books, if you're actually looking for that, you will see, if I can find the right page.
Hillary, I'm not sure if you got, it was a separate document, budget versus actual for the fiscal year, where it's like
I-
got blue and yellow colors.
Was it
Do you
just
have that?
posted? Was it just posted today?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
This is
Because
from
we got
Monday
it the
night.
last board meeting.
There was
This
an
one?
update after that,
There
though.
was-
Okay, Hillary, you should have the one from Monday's meeting as well, which
Right, the one
might
we,
help.
it says financial report as of 6/10/2024.
Yes.
Correct.
Right. So that's public, right? That can go out to the public at large.
Absolutely.
So if I get an angry neighbor wanting to chew my head off, I can say, let's sit down and let's go over these numbers. And that's the document I should look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right,
Thank
you're
you,
welcome.
Hillary.
So just to kind of reiterate, we're literally, well, it's projected, but looking at the first page where it says 53,612,000, that is an actual dollar amount, but in essence, it's getting put in on a negative balance, so it's not really 53, it's whatever, less 10 million. So that is actually the budget for the general fund. I think we'll answer a number of
As
these
we go
questions
through.
as we walk through this, and we're gonna kind of go through it methodically, so, yeah, we'll definitely be getting into those details here shortly. Yeah.
So,
I just have a question for Dr. Morlock
Mhm.
before we get to the presentation. And it's because you're only here for a few more, well, 2 weeks, essentially.
Nobody's counting, I'm sure.
It's, the contingency is $1 million
Mhm.
that we're trying to get to. My concern is, and what your perspective is, we have a significant amount of liabilities in our buildings at this point. And I guess I don't know what to do. I mean, if we're just trying to get to $1 million, I think the HVAC in this building was quoted right around $1 million. That's just the HVAC and not the chiller. So I don't know, based on that and our risk of our liabilities to our buildings, what's your thoughts?
Sometimes crossing your fingers helps. I will, sorry. $1 million is what we've put in, and anything above that means we'll go back to reduce additional staff. So there is no other place to go for this. We felt that $1 million was probably a minimum and also a maximum, because anything beyond that becomes now additional reductions in force. I honestly think that you're probably going to be okay. I don't, again, you can't predict the future when an HVAC system goes out or something else happens, or, right, any of these kind of things that happen. Now, we have some dollars in the budgets for maintenance and operations, so there are dollars to fix things, right? Door comes off the hinges, window gets broken, those things are all taken care of, but this is for those larger ones that you don't know. I think that if you go far deeper, then we're going to continue to cut into places that will make it even harder to operate. So we felt that this was a good balance between having some money in the bank at $1 million and then also not destroying every program. One of our goals was to, even if programs got cut back, not to eliminate. That was a huge gamble, right? We're trying to hold on a little bit, because if you keep them going enough, then you can recover more quickly. But there's really no other place to go. If the committee or the board wishes for us to increase our what we have proposed as a beginning fund balance, then we'll go back to reducing staff additionally. So we're kind of in a place that we felt this was as safe as we could get without continuing to go deeper into the staffing. It's
What's the
really
reserve
hard.
requirement?
Say again?
What's the reserve requirement?
By
Well-
board policy,
10%
It is still 10%?
by policy, yeah.
we did suspend that next year at our last board meeting.
We did.
We did.
Monday night, yeah.
Mhm.
Which is why we just have $1 million. Is that
Correct. Yeah. If not, we would cut another $4.5 million in staff.
And we even talked the other night too, we've been under 10% for several years, probably
Right.
3 or 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a great question.
And so part of that
That's a good
conversation
question.
then for the board to consider, and even the going forward, is what do your goals look like? So you're not going to start at 10%. So do you go to a 2%, then a 4%, whatever that kind of leeway looks. Again, if the property sells that we have listed and the board decides to put that in ending fund balance, that may leapfrog you to a 5 or 6% already, and then you try to get to. And we did talk about it. I believe that having a healthy ending fund balance also helps your credit rating if you happen to go out for a bond to be able to borrow, because then you get additional funds more than you ask for because of the way that the points work and all those highly complicated things that they will explain to you later. But so those are important things to remember. I think that there is, we cannot count on that property being sold.
Mm-hmm.
That's not in the budget.
Mm-hmm.
However, if it does, that gives you additional breathing room.
Mhm.
We didn't count on anything that's not in here. We didn't count on additional furlough days from our staff. We did not ask. We did not go that way. We have made this without that. So that's kind of where we are. So I think there is some hedging a bet and some risk, yes, and additional cuts to staffing would be really hard. So we felt this was the best balance for us right now.
All right, I think this might be a good time to segue over to Kim on presentation of the budget.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Joe. Thank you to all of our budget committee members, board committee members. Your commitment to serve is very appreciated. As Dr. Joe just did for us, I want to return the favor and thank him for the leadership he has provided to us over the past couple of months. It has definitely been not even a roller coaster. This has been like a free fall, it feels like. So appreciate you being there to kind of help slow us down from hitting the ground too hard. And actually really am feeling like we've got a path forward. So appreciate y'all being here tonight. So want to start with outlining what we're going to be doing here. We're just going to start with some foundational, really high-level information to make sure we have a solid ground. And then after this brief introductory period, we're going to move into a collaborative, more conversational, piece-by-piece approach through the budget. We're not necessarily going to go line by line. We're going to highlight what we feel like is important to point out and then take your questions at intervals throughout so that we're not going through a huge process, then going back, well, there was something you said about this piece. So we're going to pause frequently throughout this process, make sure all the questions are answered. So we start out with tonight, what is a budget? And as I mentioned, we want to make sure our foundation is absolutely solid for our work to be effective. And a budget, we have to remember, is a plan. And plans can, and in our case, absolutely will change. The budget is an estimate. Every one of these estimates in here are developed using projections and assumptions to come together in a single document. And the budget must guide us. It must essentially be our playbook for the decisions that we make throughout this coming year. And finally, most importantly in my perspective, continuous monitoring, compliance, and adjustment That is going to be the key. This budget should not be printed and put on a shelf. It needs to be a living document. It's built with the best information we have available at this time, but it continually needs to be reevaluated and adjusted. In the past couple of months, we've updated our financial reports for this very purpose. It is going to highlight every single line item that is presenting a concern. It's going to show you what percentage of the budgeted amount that we are at. If I'm providing a report in October and it says we've spent 90% of a budgeted amount for a line item, I expect to be questioned on it, and we are going to say, actually, that is a cost we pay up front every September, or actually, that is a concern, and we do need to reevaluate and adjust our budget. And then a note on the budget document itself. The structure of these budget documents is defined by state law, and whether we love it or hate it, it is a defined structure, and it provides 2 years of actual expenditures. That does not tell you whether or not that amount was under or over budget. So I'm gonna go as far as a number of the line items in the 2021-22, as well as the 22-23 school year, clearly would have been over budget. Otherwise, we would not have reduced our ending fund balance. An ending fund balance is only reduced if your expenditures are over your revenues. The 23-24 column says that this is our budgeted column because we cannot put actuals for the current fiscal year into a budget document until an audit is completed. I got an email last week from the auditor scheduling the audit already, and it's like, give me a minute to get through this year. But we're on the books because auditors are extremely hard to find in this state, and many districts had their state school funds withheld after not meeting the audit submission deadline.
And Kim, can you pause 1 second?
I absolutely.
So one of the things that, and we've made this change already in these board meetings, and we included a copy of this, we talked about it before, the general fund statement of revenues and expenditures. And this document is meant to generate questions from the board and to give you a better idea of whether you're on track or not. So just getting the number and saying this is what we have, like, that doesn't really tell you anything. So the reason that we have moved to this, I have to thank Jackie again for her support to get us going on this, but this comes out of our system, so it does say, are you on track, are you over or under where you were before, and are you projected to be over? And these are now ways that will help the board specifically ask those questions when you're meeting us. So I can see that we've got a highlighted one, why are we over on this one, why are we projected to be over, what's your plan? So those kinds of questions, this document is meant to help you understand where we are in the stream. And I think that it's been a huge change. And it's also a change that we added this year at the WESD because it's better to know not how much money you have in your account, but are you going to make it? So that's what this is for.
Wally, could I ask you one question
Yeah,
on auditing?
please.
You said there's only a small amount in the state that we can use. Are we allowed to go out of state for an auditor?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yes, you can, but I'm going to put a big but in there. Those auditors really are trained for that specific state. So when they come into Oregon, I like to say that audits should be very similar across the country, but we all have very special rules, and it takes auditors often a long time to catch up on and figure out what needs to be done in Oregon, which may delay your audit and then delay your state school fund payments because your audit may be late.
That makes sense. Thanks, Jackie.
Perfect.
All right, sorry to interrupt, but
I appreciate this.
All right.
Very
There
conversational,
you go.
so want to make sure we answer questions along the way.
It does look like Hillary has
Hillary.
her hand up.
Yes.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Yeah, I had two little questions in there. Number one is, and this doesn't have to happen during these meetings, but it would be kind of nice to know up front. Well, actually, my first question is, has budget actual reporting not been part of our previous process?
It is not part
we
of the.
not-
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Hilliard. Go ahead.
So I mean, like our monthly, no report has been going to the board with exactly that, the sort of the current actuals?
The prior reports were reporting on year-to-date at a fund level. We definitely,
Okay.
we're not producing a report on an appropriations level to identify line by line items that were missing the mark. You know, some people do, charts and graphs are great, and they do give you a quick snapshot. They don't provide that warning track sign, and that's where we're at. And I would love to incorporate some cover pages to this document as we move forward that provide more that high level for somebody that just wants a
Yeah.
glance. 100%. Right now, we had to get to the nerdy accounting level, and
No,
and I say
that's
that
totally,
respectfully, yes.
yeah, totally great, Kim, and I get it. I've had to do my own books as a nonprofit leader, and I literally used to come in with like my checkbook register and go, here it all is. I don't know, make sense of it if you can. So I'm pleased that we have a tool that we can use to go over that. And related, and maybe this will come out in your presentation, I'm curious to know, like, what are we worried about? Which categories are we sort of biting our fingernails on? Because those are the ones maybe that need the most brainstorming and oversight.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. And those are the discussions we'll be having. So I appreciate that.
You know, I'll just add to that about the new reports we've been receiving the last few board meetings. Kim, thank you for these. They're much easier to follow and much easier for us to track as board. It's an easier snapshot to kind of give you, like you said, that warning signs, and you've highlighted in yellow, and it makes it a lot easier for us to really dig into which funds are critical. So I just want to say thank you.
We appreciate that feedback, and our team, you know, business team and the leadership, we, you know, that is our goal. We're here to serve as well. So what you as board members, budget committee members, and as our community need, that's what we need to hear. So perfect.
Hillary, did you have a second question? This is Dan. I'm just monitoring your hand, so that's all I'm trying to do
No,
here.
sir, sorry.
Nope, you're good. Just monitoring that. Thank you.
All right.
You bet.
So if there's no additional questions, we're going to move on. Like I said, we're going to have a lot of conversational piece going forward. So I want to talk briefly roles and responsibilities of the Budget Committee. Tonight you've heard your budget message from Dr. Joe Morlock. You've received the proposed budget document. In a few minutes, we're going to move into the reviewing and discussion stage. It's important to note that many pieces of this budget are predetermined by administration and leadership, by contracts and legal requirements. The Budget Committee is not to discuss individual staff, not to discuss hiring or reductions. These decisions have been made by the leaders in our schools and among our programs. But what we do ask from our Budget Committee is validating the level of spending that has been proposed, validating the different appropriation levels, asking questions about variances between prior actuals, current year budgeted amounts, proposed amounts, and providing the budget authority for this coming year. So, no shocker, we have had a very shortened timeline for the budget this year. It's been difficult to say the least, compressed by the work that had to be completed before the budget development could even begin. And in a typical year, we'd begin in the fall, meeting with building leaders, identifying needs within the current year, but also for the coming year. In winter, we would present our audit to the board and for that prior year and establish the budget calendar for the spring. As spring arrives, we work with our principals on their discretionary budgets. We're going to talk a little bit more about our school budgets here in a moment, and then develop a comprehensive budget for budget committee meetings that should occur at least in May, certainly not June, preferably. For this budget season, the entire process was put on hold while the difficult reductions in force had to be completed and compressed a month-long time frame, a many-month time frame into just days. And additionally, the Oregon budget law drives this schedule. It is not ideal. I am going to acknowledge right now that we are here tonight and again tomorrow night. In perfect world, we would have time in between to certainly work on any discussions that we have here tonight. But working backward from the state mandated June 30th deadline and accounting for what is still required to be printed newspaper publications at a certain interval in advance of a budget hearing and or budget committee meeting, and holidays next week. There is a holiday midweek, and deadlines to submit a form called an ED1 that has every budget line item that you actually approve, the actual numbers of the budget, we had no choice but to meet tonight and tomorrow night. Should we run into a situation where 2 meetings are not enough, the only other option is Friday night, June 14th. We must have the ED1 to the newspaper Monday morning, and it will take us the weekend to get that prepared. So just kind of, I apologize for the timeline, not ideal, wanted to address that. Budget development process, wanted to go through real quickly how we get here. We start by reviewing our current enrollments, exiting our seniors from this calculation, looking at our current kindergarten enrollment numbers as a basis for what we may see next year, as Joe likes to liken it to the RSVP percentage for a wedding. Yeah, you don't know who's showing up until day 1, sometimes day 3 or 4 of the new school year. Determining these enrollments then allows us to move on to revenue projections. Our state school fund is our primary source of our general fund revenue and hinges on those enrollment figures. When we get to the general fund discussion of our enrollment, we're going to dive much deeper into state school fund. I do appreciate Joe kind of jumped on that, so we can probably jump in a little deeper right away. Additional revenues from property taxes, federal and state funding, grant sources, as well as our ending fund balances are all closely examined. And again, we're going to talk more about that. With those completed, we identify personnel, contractual, required program costs. These are things that really are set by either bargaining agreements, utility rates, insurance rates. There are a number of costs that are out of our hands. With our existing contracts in place with both associations, determining our personnel costs is much more defined for 24-25. Yet it was the process of identifying the number of personnel that our budget could afford for this coming year that was the challenge and compressed the timeline. This is also the point at which our building budgets are integrated. While we don't do site-based budgeting as it was in the past at this moment, we do have a modified site-based budgeting approach. All of our schools have a budget that is at their discretion. We call it their discretionary budget. And that is for non-personnel. Let me back up. It is for some personnel costs above and beyond salary and benefits, such as maybe a school would like to start a new club. Maybe they would like to provide stipends for their staff for certain things. Those are in their discretionary budgets that they balance and manage. So then we move on, after finishing our contractual costs, transportation, food services, along with operational costs, as I mentioned, utilities and insurance. It essentially allows us to balance supplies and other expenditures with the remaining revenues. The key budget changes for this year are coming from the fact that we have declining enrollment and we've had increasing staff. It has resulted in overspending and depleted reserves, to be as clear as we can. Costs are continuing to increase for a number of other areas, as well as new legislation. In the budget document, you're going to see some lines increase and we're going to see others decrease. We're going to go through those in our discussion period. Want to real quick address fund allocations. A summary of funds can be found in your budget document, Roman numeral pages 1 and 2. Our general fund accounts for the financial resources of the district, except those required to be in another fund. And after that, we have special revenue funds used for grant and contractual funds from other agencies, such as Oregon Department of Education. But uses on these funds is restricted to the activities defined through the requirements in each of those grants and contracts. Debt service funds is where our principal and interest payments are budgeted for things such as our general obligation bonds, PERS bonds, full faith and credit bonds. Internal service funds are used to provide goods and services throughout within the district itself. Our unemployment account is an internal service fund. We'll talk about that. We have an insurance fund as well. And then finally, we have agency and trust funds that represent the activity of our 2 charter schools. We essentially are a trust for their funds, as well as our student body funds and scholarship funds. Those are in completely separate funds.
Kim, just for the clarity on
Absolutely.
the the charter schools, the pass-through is at 81 cents on the dollar. Is that what it was?
Each charter school has their own agreement. One is at 80 and one is at 81, yes.
Okay.
Moving on, thought it was important to identify some of the assumptions that are used in this budgeting process. To know how we get to these numbers, I think, is as critical as looking at them, because what do they mean if you don't know how you got there? So while we do our best to estimate the revenue, the budget is a plan. It will change. The majority of the revenues in this budget are estimates, but as long as we have an adopted budget, we can move forward and those budget adjustments will happen throughout the year. So I've provided this for you here. We're going to talk about a lot of these. I did identify what source, meaning we're going to get into that, what account number those are under. But state school fund is provided we're provided an estimate. Those estimates fluctuate greatly, and I'd like to tell you right now that since the March 25th estimate, a new one just came out after this was printed, and it is very different. We are in the process of evaluating that because they may say one number. We know where we expect our revenues, or enrollments to really be, so we do a little adjustment on that as well. Continuing reductions on the high-cost disability grant. Many of you have heard us talking about that. We'll talk about that a little further later. We are budgeting with an assumption of a $1 million ending fund balance in 2023-2024, our current fiscal year. And that's going to create a lot of questions. How can you have $1 million at the end of the year? We received a $3.8 million deposit because of the TAN loan. Again, this puts us right back to where we anticipated we would be. Without $3.8 million deposit, 1 million minus 3.8, we would not be in a very good place at all. We used property tax collections using 6-year trend averages, county assessed value data, grant revenues will always equal expenditures. Should always, let me back up. Grant revenues need to equal expenditures. You cannot spend more than a grant is going to provide, or your general fund is going to need to subsidize. And then we did include in this budget document the implementation of the Community Eligibility Program for food service. That is the free meals for all. I do need to disclose that we are still reviewing our contract with Sodexo. We had a RFP go out. This is a brand new contract. We are reviewing that. There are complexities with this Community Eligibility Program. Absolutely, we'll do everything we can to implement it, but we cannot do it if our budget cannot sustain it. So just want to put that out there.
Are you going to talk about that further later? Are you going to talk about it further later?
We could talk about that a little bit further. There, as of April of 2024, Silver Falls qualified for free meals for all students district-wide, regardless of an eligibility, family eligibility. There are some increased costs to that, and to have a program and a new contract and a food service department, which we're going to talk about a little more, that has that does need some support from the general fund. It's a complex case, and I don't think there's anybody that would argue we don't want to do it. We want to offer free meals for all, absolutely. But what is the budgetary requirement to do so?
And is it cost prohibitive at this point, is what you're saying?
We are hoping not. We are doing everything we can to find a way to make sure it does not cost more than our current model.
Was
Right.
that list, I remember looking at that in here as a line item, and I probably jumped in the gun, but
Yep.
I feel like, and again, I looked at a lot, that we already have budgeted 0 in that column.
That is exactly why I wanted to put this on here, is that we've budgeted $0 in meal sales in this budget, under the assumption that we will be able to incorporate that. Should we not be able to do that, meal sale revenue would be in the budget. However, the reimbursements shown on, I believe, the revenue line 4202 or 4500, it's in the 4000 series, I apologize, all these numbers sometimes, the revenue in form of reimbursement would decrease. So it literally would move revenues from one bucket into another.
So I'm hearing minimal risk on projecting 0 and it not working out?
So the projection, so the zero there is for the money we would take in if we were selling meals. But
Oh,
we're-
got you.
Right,
Not,
so.
not a zero on the cost. Okay.
Correct.
Yep, thank you.
We are not counting on revenue that we may not receive.
Perfect.
That is
That's a
actually,
good
that is
answer.
actually a key for this entire budget. We are not counting on revenue that we cannot
Okay.
feel more confident it's going to show up, so.
So food service has been a drag on this budget for the school, for our district for years.
It's a
And-
difficulty. It absolutely is a difficulty,
It would
yes.
be great if we could make a little headway on that and have less of a hit on the general fund budget.
Less subsidizing would be fabulous, or, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, if we can maintain and provide free meals to all, there is some win there, right? So, but we do need to plan for it. If food service is going to need some subsidizing, that needs to be part of an annual budget and a conscious decision that we make.
And there may be changes to the model itself that will help with those, right? So depending on how you do it now, that's something I think that the incoming superintendent will also be looking at, because it's been a fairly large financial thing that we've had, that the district has dealt with over the years. And so there's gonna have to be a pretty serious study on what is it we offer, how do we offer it, and that kind of work. We just could not get to that in this spring, but that is something that that needs a big look, because it's a large thing. I don't think the CEP, we've gone through the numbers, the CEP, and actually what changed was that Oregon matched the CEPI, and they brought that down. That's the incentive program. And so, we think that will actually work out. But there are other costs in the program that need to be really heavily considered, because there are ways for you to do it differently that could save you money.
So Kim, I have a question on this, just so I can understand the timeline of it. Is this something, well, we'll start with, does the board need to, is this something that the board needs to approve when it gets presented to the board at some point and we say we're moving forward? Or is this something that the district office makes a decision on their own?
I think if we identify that there is fiscal risk in any decision, it definitely needs to be brought to the board. So that is exactly what we're doing, is identifying as much information as possible so that it can be a public discussion and a public decision on moving forward.
And then to the second part, the timeline for this is, because, September is right around the corner.
As we were talking about compression, yes, this is
Okay.
another compression issue. Our contract with Sodexo must be signed by June 30th. Our election to participate in the community eligibility program, we actually have, we have a little more time. I don't want to push us all the way to the end, but we do have up until shortly before the school year begins to make that election, because the summer meal program is a separate program.
I do have ideas outside of this meeting, probably, that could probably increase the participation rate, particularly at this school in that program.
Perfect. We look forward to continuing the discussion, so thank you. So I want to be able to get into our detailed discussions on our budget itself. We have some assumptions here on the requirements, meaning the expenditures, rather than maybe going through this. Just want to highlight that we have, a lot of contracts in place. We have a lot of known costs. We do have to make some assumptions on our unemployment estimates. We'll talk about that. We know our liability insurance went up 15%. We know utilities continue to go up. We know that we have requirements by June 30th of 2025, or we will have no cybersecurity liability coverage. Many devices will have to be replaced. That is a statewide issue, and to maintain cybersecurity coverage, you need to comply with many different things. You know how you get a text on every phone and everything you log into, multi-factor authentications, changing passwords all the time, not running devices over a certain age. Yeah, so those are some of the budget challenges in front of us. Opportunities, we're gonna go with that.
Going back to that, has there been a look of what's causing the increased absences of staff?
Honestly, the majority of the increases are due to some leave programs that have been implemented, that people can take 12 weeks off paid by the state. Our substitute costs are one of our significant areas. Our budgeted amount was probably a little more optimistic, and then the implementation of that program, I hate to quote numbers right off the top of my head. I know it was at least 35 of our staff members were out for 12 weeks or more.
Through Oregon paid leave?
Yes. during
Wow.
which we bring in a sub and we continue to pay benefits for the employee on leave.
I've heard other businesses that's Oregon paid leaves.
It's,
Has been a big problem.
it's a phenomenal benefit when a person needs it, absolutely. From a financial standpoint, it is a new cost factor.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So I wanted to get through that foundational period. I appreciate actually all the conversation because it really set the ground for where we're headed. And as we continue through this, we're going to pause frequently before we move on. So in light of time, we're going to jump right into, I'm going to talk to you about your resources. This is your revenues on all funds. Roman numeral page 3 of your budget document is a summary of all of the resources, meaning all of the revenues we anticipate for this year. We are presenting to you a proposed budget for $80,355,462 across all funds. The state sources make up 63% of this, with local resources coming in next at 27%. The remainder coming from federal, intermediate, and other sources. Local revenue is going to include taxes, as well as Medicaid administrative claiming some Medicaid revenues for some of our students. Intermediate sources are going to include transit funds from our ESD, as well as county resources. We'll talk more about that shortly. State sources are going to include the state school fund, as well as state grants. Again, we're talking about all funds at this point. We're going to break it down here in a moment, fund by fund. Federal sources include revenue from the federal government, of course, and that's going to be primarily IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, if I got that right, Section 611 and 619. It's going to include title funds, Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV. All of the ESSER funds allocated to Silver Falls were depleted in the 2022-23 school year, with one small exception for one of our charter schools having $65,000 for this year. The other category you see up here is a small portion, but it does include interfund transfers, as we were just talking about, funds that we must use to subsidize other programs that may not be self-sufficient, as well as those beginning fund balances. When we move on to our requirements across all funds, found on Roman numeral page 4 in your document, the detailed information for all these fund requirements is going to start on page 34. Again, we're going to go through that here in a little bit, but salaries and benefits continue to be the largest portion of our budget, which rightfully so. We're in the people business, and that's where we focus. Other objects and the purchase services are the next two, representing 32% together, and those represent things like our transportation, our food service contract, our debt service payments, those fund transfers like we talked about, and we're going to talk about some of these more as we go through the individual funds.
Just to kind of dovetail on that too, like we always do talk about salaries and benefits being the number one, line item on our general fund. We've talked about that a lot, especially lately. And in your introduction, you talked about, and we've talked about the staffing levels, declining enrollment. Jackie provided a really very interesting and informative graph for us a few months ago to the board meeting about we're up 5% in staffing and we're still down 7% in enrollment. And I know you put that formulation up there too, so that was really helpful to understand that. But we're not only increasing staff, decreasing enrollment, we're also now paying a higher amount, not only for 22-23, but also 23-24 for our staffing, based on at least 2 collective bargaining agreements that we had entered into. So it's not only that we were in essence overstaffed, decline in enrollment, we're also paying more for that staff over the last two fiscal years. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, and it has proven to draw some phenomenal teachers who, we are now a competitive district salary-wise, and it was proven by who chose to come to Silver Falls. Yes, there is a cost to that, absolutely, but it definitely was an investment needed for all of our staff. So I did want to mention your purchase services. Sometimes that gets to be quite a question. That does include also our substitute costs. That is a purchase service. We do not employ our substitutes through our payroll. That is a third party. So anytime you're paying someone in essence as a contractor, they're going to be in here. Purchased services actually also includes utilities. It includes rent for facilities. So it's a very broad category. So it can be very, very deceiving, the titling of that. So
Kim, on
Yes.
the substitutes, does it track the substitutes through the purchase services, but does it also track our staff members? Aren't they, if they give up their prep and cover periods, aren't they given money? Does it?
Yeah, that is included in salaries because we want to make sure to report that as earnings for various reasons. One, it's a taxable income as well as reportable to PERS. So anything that our employees who receive a W-2 from us, anything that they are paid is going to be in this blue 34% salary section. Anything that they receive related to being employed with us as far as a benefit, health insurance, PERS, and then our portion of FICA and workers' comp, those are going to be part of that 24% benefit portion,
Hey,
associated
Kim,
payroll costs. Yes?
I'm wrapping my brain around, I'm trying to find this money. One of the big mistakes we made was estimating that ESSER funds were gonna be coming in, and they didn't. And I'm looking at these actuals on Roman numeral 3, and I'm not finding them where that would be, but I see it on this presentation in categories 4,500, and then subtitle like 911, 922, 923. The reason I'm asking is because I'm concerned, look at the adopted budget from last year and our proposed one this year, and we're still expecting revenue to go up.
And I apologize, which line are we?
Well, Roman numeral 3 on this page, and I'm just curious
Sorry.
about where that 1.4 from, like, I think that was 21, 22, and then the next year we just didn't. My concern overall about this, Kim, is we're expecting to get paid more this year. Our budget's the same as is going over last year, so we're still expecting to get paid more, but I'm really confused where that 1.4 million or 600,000 the next year.
Yeah.
I guess my concern is, are we making the same mistake again? I don't think so, but where are we getting the additional money that, did the state school fund really bounce up that much more?
So let's separate the two. There's two questions, and one is ESSER, so we'll come back to
Correct.
ESSER in a second.
Yeah.
The other one is about, do you get more revenue? And the answer is yes. So in a biennium, the first year of the biennium, we're funded at 49% of the biennial amount of the 10.2 billion. In the second year, you are funded at 51%. So that split is not a half and half. So we are automatically getting 2% more on top of what we'd gotten before. So they already estimate that your costs are going to go up a certain amount.
So this proposed really accounts for that additional state school fund increasing?
Correct.
Is that-
Correct.
Yeah, and we can go through the breakdown on the ADMW too.
Yeah, and we're
then
gonna,
the ESSER one is the one I think.
yeah, when we get to the general fund itself, we'll point out exactly where to find that.
Yeah, and I know that on the revenue 3, I could see how we had combined in that 201 line, all the Title I funds, and then we separated them this year from 201 to like 208, and that's $1.38 million, which lines up kind of traditionally with what we did in line 201. I think you guys probably separated that just because it's easier to track.
Is absolute transparency. I decided, actually, let me back up. Our auditors gave us a suggestion after completing last year's audit that it would be wise to break those out. So we'll talk about that as well
Okay.
when we get to our special revenue funds.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So, want to jump into general fund resources, exactly what you're asking about. Your general fund resources are the revenues that are going to be recorded in the general fund. Starts on page 1, official number page 1 of your budget document. And they're, the purposes of the general fund, I apologize, of the total resources for the general fund, you'll see up here on this chart, our state school fund continues to grow as the primary percentage or the primary source of the revenue within the general fund. Those green amounts are indicating the years in which ESSER inflated the federal dollars, okay? So those were 21, 22, 22, 23. Those are both actuals. The 23, 24 numbers are going to be budgeted, and the 24, 25 are the proposed. With the state school fund playing this most critical role, as you see here in this general fund chart, projecting that enrollment is absolutely key. The state school fund uses many varying factors, but again, enrollment is that top piece. Our property tax collections, which shown here in the blue, are also a large portion of the revenues, yet it's very important to understand the give and take between property tax revenue and state school fund. So the state school fund looks at our enrollment and says, okay, here is your allocation of dollars for the next year. Tell us how much you're gonna get in property taxes. Okay, we're gonna take that out. If you get more in property taxes than you tell them, they go back to your state school fund, they say, oh, we need to take more away. If you get less in property tax revenue, you will receive more from the state. It is a very unique process, but it helps ensure districts with high revenues, and I need to be clear, property tax is not the only piece that goes into that, but there are a number of other sources that go into how much state school fund itself you receive. There are some counties, I believe Vernonia area, some others, they receive so much timber revenue that there are years they may receive 0 state school fund dollars. So just wanted to kind of share where our general fund revenue is coming from. Other general fund revenues come from our local education school district, Willamette ESD. The revenues that are allocated by the ESD to the district, we can use those to purchase services through the ESD, but any unused funds are passed through to us. So for 24-25 specifically, we are using some of our ESD transit dollars for things such as physical therapists, occupational therapists, certain technologies and softwares that we can get at a much lower price by buying through a consortium. We get student access to programs such as the Willamette Promise, the WCA, Willamette Career Academy, much more. It is definitely something that gets analyzed to determine where is the best way to utilize those funds. Again, what doesn't get used with them then does come through to us as something known as transit dollars.
Kim, just a quick question. You said, enrollment is key here, making sure we get our estimates as tight as we can right now. And also the number we get from the state school fund, I always like to bake it on, what's my estimate per student, right? And I know that in the past, we've kind of used that, again, don't quote me on it, roughly $10,000 per student kind of coefficient. Is that still semi-accurate?
As of March 25th, or is the new one that came out last week? No, I'm just kidding. At one point, it was closer to 11,000 for this coming year, which is, of course, why we're seeing increased budgeted state revenue in that general fund. Again, that is a very fluid number right now as things continue to change. Being the second half of the biennium, we do definitely know what the state allocation is, but what fraction of that allocation does Silver Falls represent? That is the key. So we've traditionally been about 0.64% of the state enrollment. There's and we use that as a judge, because if everybody else is going down, our proportion of the pot is going to be constant. If we're going down and other districts are going up, we have a problem. So I'm not trying to say it's fortunate that everyone is going down, but if it
we should get more of the pot, so to speak, if everybody's going down.
The pot is the pot. How big's your slice of pie?
But it's still going to hit our bottom line, because I look at, again, the enrollment figures here compared to 2020. We're down currently 240 students. If we use that coefficient, that's 2.5 million in state school funding.
This chart right here up in front of us showing projections for 24-25, just start over there at 12th grade on the bottom black line and come down. Wow. We are not seeing the younger kids enrolling. Is it declining birth rates? Yes, that's part of it. Is it alternative schooling options? Yes, that's part of it. Is it, what is it? So for comparison, enrollment in our senior class who just graduated last week, 293 as of June 1. If we're projecting 245 coming in, right there is nearly a 40 student drop.
Close to 400.
No, close. Kim, what happens when the kids graduate early? You mentioned something like that has an effect. Like, do we still get the full year's worth of? That affects because it's hours, right? It's hours in the class.
The students, correct me if I'm wrong, if a student exits enrollment early their senior year,
Yeah.
we get a partial ADM for that student.
Even though they got their high school diploma and graduated, which is the goal.
So now here,
They're not attending though.
Yeah,
They're not attending.
they're not.
ADM stands
Average.
for average daily
Average
membership.
I know.
they're no longer
Are you showing up or not? Yeah,
That is a,
it's
Okay.
really good.
it's a, to me, that's a systemic, concern, because
Isn't after they've gone 10 days, you lose it? Lose it?
yes, in an absence, so let's say mom and dad decide to go on a month trip, that child is unenrolled after 10 days, would be re-enrolled when they come back, and we get a fractional ADM for that child that year.
And I would say it's a bit reductionary, but it's similar in kind of this strange formula of like your ELs where you get less funding when your EL students pass the ELPA, they exit out,
Exactly.
but you're compelled to want to educate them so they become proficient and pass. So you're, to an extent, and it's not a massive amount of a monetary hit, but you're almost receiving a penalty by doing what you're supposed to be doing. And
That's my point.
getting in right, and so that's one of several different examples of how the formula is strange.
And I apologize for this tangent, but I think it's important that I understand this. Is this why some districts, they generally would try to fight a kid to want to get done early, even though it might benefit the kid, but it costs the district money? Is this something that actually happens?
I'm not aware of that happening, but I definitely see there would be financial impact to any student exiting your system.
Okay, thank you.
It is in the realm of possibility that happens.
So I would
And- No, please.
No.
objectively speaking, a lot of ODE will come back and say you're violating civil rights if you try and
Yep.
prevent a student from graduating early, or you try to prevent an English learner from opting out of EL services. And so they kind of blanket say if they say they want to, you can't impede that process. And so in practice, does it happen below the board that you're trying to, who knows, but above the board, you're not supposed to impede at all, and you just take the financial hit.
Yeah, what services can you offer? What can you keep kids intrigued in staying into school? But to Dr. Helm's point, there's a line that you could cross and be in trouble. So it's trying to make sure you're trying to keep kids engaged and offer them things that would interest them, but ultimately they get to exercise those rights.
So kind of on topic, just more for my education than really need to explain the why necessarily. If you look at Community Roots, they grew money on this proposed budget, but they have the highest outflow of students at 21%. If you have less students, how did you get more money? And then if you look at Bethany Charter, they have a $1.3 million proposed budget, and they only grew by 2.3. So if it's 11,000 per head, I don't get how does that?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. Actually ties us right into
Why did that on
why.
purpose?
Man, I didn't even like set you up on that one. So, as Dr. Morlock was talking about, the state does provide a 2-year view of your enrollment, yes. And you are funded on the higher of those 2 years. For Silver Falls specifically, it is undoubtedly, I could be, we talk about betting person, this one I'd be one I'd bet on. We're probably gonna be funded on our 23-24 enrollments. I do not anticipate us having a higher enrollment next year. However, charter schools, we actually, while we as a district, including our charter schools, have an ADM that's assigned to the district, the charter schools' revenues from us are based on their actual enrollments. So while you are seeing differences in that, actually Community Roots had a very difficult couple of years where their enrollment was extremely low. and their revenues took a huge hit. In fact, we talk about the reconciliation payment in May every
Yeah, the
year from the
500,000.
state school fund. They had a huge negative adjustment this last May. It
But
was,
they still got to keep the money.
oh no. I mean, we receive the money from the state and we look at it and say, okay, they're giving us more, taking some back. How much is attributable to each school's enrollment? We have to break that out. And they are given their share regardless of what that is, even if it's a negative adjustment
Yeah.
from the state. So one of the things was Community Roots had been being funded on a 2-year look back. They finally got to where you got 2 bad years and we were funding you, and it just, the state overfunded the ADM attributable to that one charter school. Fortunately, this year's looking better, so they had a positive adjustment for this year, but after their audit was done for 22-23, there was a negative adjustment. So yes, their budgets are increasing. Community Roots is increasing because their enrollment has jumped significantly. When they lost their middle school, if you remember a couple years ago, they had to close their middle school, immediately lost multiple grades of students. Now, it wasn't a large number, but proportionately for them and their enrollment, it was a large proportion. So that is why we're seeing that growth, is they are actually seeing kids come back at all different levels. Look at their 6th grade class for next year, 9 kids, but we're projecting, that they could be in the 17, 15, looking at those younger grades, they're fairly consistent. So they graduated, I don't have it here in front of me, how many they have in, it'd be 6th grade this year. But, if they graduated 9 and they're projecting to bring in 17, that's going to increase their budget a lot.
So these dollar amounts, we'll just use these line items, 740, 760,
Yep.
just as an example. These are set funds given by the state. Like, it's not like we barter or we move these money. It is what it is. But if that wasn't the case and it wasn't happening, we as a meeting or a community, if you will, could say, Community Roots, you're kind of going down a path where we got to look at your spending and kind of tailor it back on the projection of that you're going to eventually lose money. Just as an example. I mean,
Yeah.
you can use Bethany as,
Both of the charter schools have their own school boards and they do their own budgets. So they actually operate independently from that perspective. So they are responsible for building their own balanced budget. We do provide them with revenue projections based on, because they are part of Silver Falls School District from a state funding formula. Actually, in your budget document, the page right after the budget committee does talk about the state school fund. This $10,000 per student, $11,000 per student, that is their same number. They happen to use the general purpose grant extended ADMW. Sorry, I had to look at the number. Sometimes it is a little bit different than the district, but yeah, the charter schools are very unique in that they do not cost Silver Falls money.
Sure.
The funds come from the state and their proportionate share is passed through them at their contractual rate.
but in theory, as a general fund is divided out per all the schools that we have in Silverton, with going back, I think with what you were kind of saying earlier, the superintendent could meet with these principals and look at, you were given X for your school, your projection is this, what are we doing now for the 2-year shortfall or whatever, and try to hold the principals more as a business owner in that regard to their allotted funds?
Correct. And that is part of their discretionary budget that they are provided every year. Their discretionary budget is defined by the state school fund revenues that we anticipate.
We do hold back either, whether it be 20 or 19%, depending on the school, correct?
Correct.
For busing.
But we provide services.
We
Yeah, we
provide
provide certain services for them, one being transportation,
Special
all
education.
special education,
all special education.
all accounting, all, yes, all
So whereas-
payroll.
Whereas each student within the rest of our schools get, let's just say $10,000 per ADM
Yeah,
rate
yeah, yeah.
coefficient, they're getting 81 cents of that on the dollar, because we hold back certain things from them.
That's because they don't provide those services themselves and we
Correct.
provide this for them. So it's,
Correct.
all of ours are sort of getting the same amount, but we have infrastructure like to do payroll and to do, those kinds of things.
So really the message though from this enrollment projection is exactly as Dr. Joe was talking about, that it does appear pretty obvious that we're in declining enrollment, and we will need to continue to keep this in mind as budgets are developed moving forward. We need to prepare for what is potentially going to be either decline in our proportionate share of state school fund revenue, maybe changes to the model statewide. You know, there's just a lot moving forward. As Dr. Joe said, and this is hard for me to say, we probably should invest in a population study. I will be blunt, there are not funds in this budget right now. However, if revenues came in and we felt like that was a priority, that would be something to consider. So.
This looks pretty drastic, but how's this, do you have any idea how this compares to other districts?
Honestly, because our proportionate share of the state school fund is staying fairly level, it would imply that most districts are seeing similar. I will tell you there are districts like Estacada, for some reason, has just exploded in enrollment. I think that's who it was. Certain districts have exploded. Some have taken on virtual charter schools, and that, of course, changes enrollments. I mean, so there are a lot of moving pieces to that.
Are you able to save the funds into the reserve? So let's say you get paid on this, but you get paid on the projection, but it's even less, heaven forbid. Can you save X amount of dollars and put it into your reserve by law, so that then when that actually does hit, you're like, it's okay because we really already have it saved?
We absolutely need to be saving, because we know that our ADMW hit next year will either be these 24-25 projections or the 25-26 enrollment if it goes up.
Okay, so you're not penalized if you put it in a reserve, and the state just lowers your money then if you didn't use it.
No.
Correct.
They're gonna come, if our projections are too high initially, they'll always true it up on the back end. Or they'll add more if we undershot our projections. So
But you don't
the state's always gonna come and true you up, no matter what, one way or the other. So it's like we're gonna get hit one way or another.
I liken it to your income taxes. You can lower your withholding out of your paycheck, but IRS is going to come get you.
One way or
They're
another,
going to
gonna
find
get
you.
you. Yeah.
They're going to true up with you.
I think your question was about rolling dollars into next year, and that can absolutely be done.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So all the dollars that come in are in your account, right? And that becomes your ending fund balance, which then rolls into your beginning fund balance. Anything that's not spent is kept. But the one thing we have to remember is that we're working in 3 budget years at all times. So when those truing up happen, or we go back through and we have, so the state will say, well, your estimates were this, and actually they were something else, or your property tax revenue comes in higher, well, then you owe the state back money that they already paid you, because they're going to give you exactly $11,201. Well, actually now it's changed as of today, right? But that number is the maximum amount you're going to get. So that's where we might be we're going to be writing a check essentially of $400,000 to give back to the state because we got more local property tax. But we're always going to get that one number. Now, anything we don't spend, yes, rolls over, becomes a reserve. So that's was part of my message at the beginning. Anytime you don't have to spend a dollar, just keep it, because it will continue to grow your ending fund balance, which then becomes your beginning fund the next year. But yeah, all of those are savable.
So on that state school fund estimate, there is about 2/3 of the way down, there's a box called the 2024-2025 total formula revenue. That's what they're calculating we should get for education. Then the box below it that talks about the state school fund, I'm sorry, I'm looking at this upside down. State school fund grant is the amount they're saying, this is what we're gonna give you after we subtract the information up in the upper left-hand box. So the $49,165,856 as of this estimate was our share of the state school fund, but they're saying based on the projections up above, the local revenue is taken out of that. So yeah, it's definitely a push and pull process. So
I have a question for Jackie, essentially, because I think I'm assuming you're probably included in some fairly high-level state discussions with your position. I've been talking to a state representative who's asking me some pretty pointed questions about unfunded mandates and stuff, and I think they're trying to figure this out a little bit. Is there, I mean, I don't understand how quickly the government works or their turnovers when they have opens or when they have sessions for voting, but we're setting this budget for to be as conservative as we possibly can. Is there any chance that the state's gonna change anything when it comes to the state fund, the general fund?
For next fiscal year, no.
Yeah.
So during, the long session will start at the end of next January. And this last couple of months, we've been working on a current service level projection for the state school fund for the next biennium already. So we're working years out in advance. All of those things are conversations we're having. I think it's great that you're talking to your legislators, advocating for your district, talking about the unfunded mandates. I think that's one of our biggest things. And the thing that I keep saying that I'm going to come back to all districts on is I can't go and say what the number is until we have data. So, for example, all the paid leave Oregon this year, now that is actually, we have data on how many people took it and what did that cost us in substitutes. Well, let's collect that data, and that then opens up a conversation for us to have as we go forward. They don't really like to just say, here's more money without any data.
You also have, so other statewide groups are working on advocacy around how these are calculated, right? So we start talking about, and we mentioned before, like if you got this one, you got fractional ADM, and you got this little piece and that little piece. And so some of these things have been in effect for 30 or 40 years, just the way that they do this thing, right? Especially since the passage of Measure 5 in 1990. And some of these formulas have not been changed. So a couple of challenges we have is that the projections that they say our costs will go up by between 2 and 3% per year. I will tell you that that's mathematically not happening. We're talking about 6%, 7%, right? So what we're seeing is we're losing ground as we're going that. So some of those things are about how do we true up what current service level actually means, which is different than adequate service level. And so you have to think about that. We also have to look at, do we have ways to bring more revenue in? When they're talking about the number of students, well, you don't have as many students, so you don't need as much money. Our students actually require more than they did in the past. So we have other resources that we're providing them that we didn't used to have in the old days, we'll say, right? So I think those are other important conversations, you know? So all those things, yeah, they're all happening. We have some work groups that we're spending hours on as we get prepared. I know it's May or June, and we're trying to get ready for November when those things have to be set before they get into the January session. So there's a lot of that work being done. Whether it won't change for this coming year, that this is set for now. We're hopeful to make some significant changes. We'll see.
For the next biennium.
For the next biennium, right.
Which next year should be fun because we're going to be budgeting during a time when we're not going to know our exact state school funds. So we'll be
That's
budgeting
the
into
best.
lots of other questions.
I love that.
Yeah, next year's gonna be more difficult.
And we will need to settle a licensed contract at the end of 24, 25 as well.
All right. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions on resources? I think we kind of organically worked through that, and we'll move on to general fund requirements. So requirements are expenditures within our general fund. Salaries and benefits, as they should, account for the largest percentage of these general fund expenditures, and it covers approximately 325 full-time equivalent. It may be more people than that, of course, if due to hours per day, such as a 7-hour classified employee is considered full-time for us, but in the terms of an FTE, it's only a 0.875 position because it's 7/8 of a 1.0. The majority of expenses in the purchase services category you see here are attributable to the expenses that are recorded due to the revenue that we get in for the charter schools. Again, it's not a cost, but we must record it as revenue and then pass it out as an expense. Our substitutes are in this group, our transportation, food service, nursing services, and other contracted instructional and professional needs. So as you can see, it leaves a pretty small little gap of budget to work with. The other objects section includes things such as transfers to debt service to make payments. Those are not optional. So we find ourselves a little slim on the what I would call discretionary spending, and happy to go through this. So page 34 is where the general fund expenditures begin, known as requirements in here. Again, to be clear, column 1 is our actuals from 21-22, again, post-audit, actuals from 22-23, what was budgeted for 23-24, not, again, where we're at, unfortunately, right now, and then what are we proposing? So very clearly, you're going to see reductions in salaries and associated payroll costs in most every category because of the reductions in force. You're going to see reductions in supplies and materials. Those are the types of things that we can be a little more trimmed on.
Kim, why did the purchase services go up so much?
That would be primarily substitutes.
Wow. So that's, yeah, because like, I think you're trying to explain what purchase services.
Yes, I can tell you right now that in that elementary, I don't have it up in front of me, but that purchase services number, which again, primarily substitutes because of the paid leave. Unfortunately, if we had $246,000 in costs in that category in 22-23, but budgeted 176 for this current year, that would probably be part of our problem right now. So really, we went from 246 2 years ago to 487.
And plus, probably our budgeted for this year is way off. For like, 'cause when we get to the actuals, or sorry, like last year's budget for that purchase service, and probably is.
Was a little slim.
The legislature really needs to understand what they did to us, and to actually all businesses. This is incredible.
This is incredible.
Do we?
You will also, you may notice a proportional change between salaries and associated payroll costs in every section. So again, the 100s are our wages paid to people, 200s are the costs associated with those wages. We did have to add a 5% cost to every dollar for unemployment this year. So every line 200 now has an additional 5% over current year's costs for those associated payroll costs. So,
Kim, before we move on, just do we have much? You know, we have actuals, and I'm going to go back to 22-23. We know we didn't finish up, you know, our licensed negotiation until the end of 23.
correct.
Do we know on the 22-23 budget how much that, you know, that increased salaries and/or benefits, you know, compared to what was budgeted?
I don't have that here in front of me. As we look later at an ending fund balance change, you know, that obviously would be a part of where that went.
Right.
But what that exact increase was, I don't have that available right now.
Because I know it was all the way up until the very end. That we had to go back and retro.
And it was
everything.
exactly. That was a cost in May of 2023 that went all the way back to September of 2022.
Right, right as we were budgeting last year.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Could you repeat the item about the unemployment, 5%?
So yes, so as we go through this tonight, we're going to be talking about something called an internal service fund. Things such as our PERS bonds and our unemployment cost. Because those are things that are paid as either on a PERS bond, our principal and interest comes due, or for unemployment as we get a quarterly bill for every dollar the state pays. Again, we are a self-insured employer for unemployment, so every dollar approved by the state we are billed for. We take a charge off of payroll in essence, and there is a transfer into that internal service fund. When the bill from unemployment comes or the bill for the PERS bond comes, we pay it out of that internal service, in essence, escrow account. It would be a good way to explain it for those of us that may have an escrow account, a little more familiar, that every little bit gets punched in there, and then when the bill comes, that's where it gets paid out of. That is, in essence, a good analogy to an internal service fund.
Okay, I think I understand. So is this just a 6-month hit, or is it longer than
The
that?
unemployment?
Yeah.
It is 5% permanently until, now, let me back up. The 5% is what we are anticipating needing to cover our unemployment expenses for 24-25. Budgeting or identifying those unemployment expenses is very difficult. So there's two parts to that we're going to get into, but the legislation that changed that allows certain employees to be eligible for benefits during recess periods, so summer break, winter breaks, those sort of things. Certain employees are now eligible for benefits during break periods, even if they are returning after that break period. We've budgeted $800,000 for that new legislation.
Okay.
The additional cost to get to the 1.4 that is budgeted this year is due to a guesstimate, and I will tell you it's a estimate at this point of how many of our reductions in force will be on unemployment for how long.
Sure.
The goal obviously is to get people reemployed as quickly as possible, but we also must plan for whatever that duration could be. Again, yes, 6 months. So I do apologize, I did misspeak. For this fiscal year, I factored it at 5%. If, after the bills start coming in and we realize how much is attributable to the legislation versus the RIF, next year's unemployment internal service charge might be able to reduce to, say, 3%, because we would not have unemployment for laid-off workers.
Right, okay, thank you.
Sorry, thank you. All those moving pieces,
And
yes.
Phil?
Kim, on middle, junior high,
Yes.
extracurricular, everything else is going down and that's going up.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Middle, junior high, extracurricular. That is the school's discretionary budget to decide where that is going. You will see that there are no FTEs, so they, it appears, have budgeted for more stipends possibly.
Is that sports basically and other things like that?
1122 is going to be athletic stipends. It's going to be clubs.
Okay.
It's going to be advisors. It's going to be things that are extracurricular to the educational part on that. And it looks like a large part of that, if we look at the detail on that, you can see salaries budgeted for 23-24 at 107 only go to 116. Unfortunately, it looks like last year we might have missed budgeting for any associated payroll costs to those salaries. And of course, there are always costs on that, so. That may have been something that was rolled all up into the 100, but we did use a different approach on the budget this year in, we know who's going to be working next year. We were able to advance them a step on their salary scale. We know exactly which PERS tier they're in. We did not use average teacher costs.
So
Use actuals.
I've got, this one is one that I didn't ask in a meeting we had the other night, but it's 1224, life skills with nursing. And
Yes.
this was something that, while we don't have actuals yet, our projected is minus $750,000 for that. And I'm seeing here that we're increasing that budget, and also the FTEs went from 0 to 15. So are we just reorganizing kind of like the Title 1, 2, 3, 4, and trying to get this corrected? Is that what this is a correction?
I would call it a
Or is this a state mandated
reclassification.
program?
Instead of having it all in 1220, which is what's called a parent function, we wanted to be able to break out it into greater detail. So you can see 700,969 on for function 1220 was budgeted for this year. That number is too low. So what we've done is taken what we anticipate for next year for both 1220 and 1224 and put them in the correct pots. There is not a reduction in, there's a very, very small reduction in function 1220 in staffing, yet you'll see the 1951 dropped to 15.87 FTE. A lot of that is due to people being put in the correct pots. So I would not say reductions, I would not say increases. I am working on really trying to reallocate people into the right pots so that we can have better data to analyze where our costs are going.
So would that be why sometimes you see going from 1 FTE to 0 FTE, but there's still cost associated with 0 FTE? So an example would be
Yep.
on 1272, just as an example, this happened,
Yep.
it's happened several times.
Yes.
But for alt ed, if you look at the salary, we go from 23-24 to 1 FTE, we go then to 24-25, 0 FTE, which tells me we lose a human, but we gain 14,000 on purchase services.
So in that specific case, we did not lose a human, but we are going to reallocate that human to alternate grant sources. So we
paying
now
them in a different bucket.
pay them from a different fund, and that is where a budget gets very difficult as we continue to look at this. We
Because
will,
that happened like 4 or 5 times.
It
I'm
happened
like,
four-
we're losing people, but we're still paying them. I'm like, well, this is our
so,
problem.
so to clarify though, what you're asking, that's an excellent question. Within Function 1280, Alt Ed, the person and the associated payroll costs have been moved, but the costs for purchase services and or supplies
Stay.
are going to remain in the general fund.
Okay.
It is, there is a lot of movement between funds, and it does make it difficult to track people. Another function, I'll just go ahead and point it right out because somebody else may have noticed it, was 2140. Psychological services. We are not getting rid of those, but we are going to fund them from other grants that are focusing on mental health supports.
Okay, so that as a community member, right?
Yes.
When I looked at that, I'm like, we have no like counseling, no nothing. So
Absolutely.
that, I was
And that
really
is
alarmed.
why these budget committee meetings are so important to be had and have this conversation, is those priorities are still priorities. Certain positions are still here, but what line item of 132 pages would we find
Yeah,
them?
yeah,
And so
yeah.
that is why we're having these discussions.
And I assume two of these that I had circled, and I'm glad Jenny brought this up, was 1291 English second language programs.
Yep.
That's taken a pretty large hit, right? From 11 FTE to 5.33 FTE. I assume that's being also reallocated in different buckets,
But
So-
also eliminate.
or is it under
And
different
again,
funds?
yep, you're looking at it here in the general fund. Title funds can be used for English language development.
So we're using
and
title
we
funds
are
for that.
blending and braiding our funds very, just to,
Right.
there we go, eloquently. So yes,
Okay.
we are, but, there are reductions across the board. And yeah,
And
those
then
are,
the other one was student safety, which is 2115. That going from 5 to 2 FTE.
Yep.
That one, I would assume that might be some other alternate
let
funding
me-
spots for that.
yeah, I need to look at so that one, according to my notes, we've never had 5 FTE in 2115. We have had 3. So I'm not exactly sure what that FTE budget number came from, but we have had 3 campus security, campus monitors, and we will have 2 next year.
I have a question for Jackie real quick, if that's okay. So we have been pretty smart in the past as a district and refinance some of our bonds to a better interest rate. So we've got a creative way to save ourselves some money. I know there's creative ways to get money, such as grants. Do you think that we have probably maybe had opportunities to maybe get some funds? When you were going through our books with Kim, do you think that we have opportunities where we could have gotten money, or we probably could go out here in the future to maybe increase some of our revenue? Like
Grant-
school safety is one of those, there's gotta be
Yeah.
grants for that.
There are, and they're very competitive, I would say, because they're so limited. Not everybody wants to provide you money for services that you've been paying for out of your general fund. And it takes time and effort to go research those grants and find those, and then meet the grant requirements. And they may not be sustainable funding. So what I always encourage districts to do, when you go to apply for a grant, you either apply for a grant for something that you know is going to be one-time funding only, or that it's going to help you get something started, but knowing that if you don't renew that grant, that you either have to cut it after you just get it going, or a general fund has to be able to absorb it. There are not just lots and lots of grants out there for public school districts to access. Most of the grant money that we receive really does come through the state and federal government.
And a lot of those other grants tend to come with significant strings attached, so you gotta be really careful.
Well, I can't speak to grants generally, but specifically with regard to our school buildings, I know that was a question that was in the public quite a bit, especially when we were looking at closing Eugene Field, and people were talking about a historic building, and there was this general idea out there that there's all this money, if you just go search for it, apply for it, you can get it. And what I found after lots of research in that regard is, we just, our buildings weren't old enough, they weren't historic enough. We don't come from a community that is poor enough or ethnically diverse enough. I mean, those were typically requirements for those kind of bonds. And I would assume there's a lot of the same requirements for, other types of bonds.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, on that scenario, we got disqualified for a lot of them just because we have a hospital
Yep.
in the community.
Yeah.
A good example of those grants is like the PEK 8 grant that for districts that have schools that can't afford their own FTE for a PE teacher, ODE will fund you, anywhere between $45K and $60K for a teacher, but that typically lasts about 2 years, but they start leaning on you very heavily to not renew that because the idea is that they will get you started, but then you start to build into your budget and your general fund the ability to sustain that PE teacher, and so they don't really like it when you apply and then reapply and then reapply one more time.
Yep.
They like to kind of spread that out as kind of seed money for different schools and districts that state.
And it's, to my knowledge too, like in terms of grants, the best grants we've had most success with are the seismic upgrade grants. Those are the ones we've had, I think now 4 buildings, now with including Silvercrest. We've done Scottsmills, we've done Mark Twain,
Butte Creek,
Butte
Victor
Creek,
Point.
so this is 5. So
Silverton Middle Gym.
that's right, so
Yep.
6 now. So those are the real grants that we've had the best success with.
We'll be chatting about that here in a little bit as well.
Figured we
And
would.
yeah, the Peak 8 grant is a great example. We do have 5 schools that receive the Peak 8 grant. It's a PE grant. But again, as you talk about strings attached, they will only let you use it for salary. So
Right.
when we
have
have
to pay benefits.
about 70 cents on the dollar for that position, we need to make sure we can fund the other part of that. Absolutely, that's better than paying the entire 100% of someone's cost, but it strings attached. We read your fine print.
Right. If you go out and you do your hiring and you pull in somebody that's got 12 years of experience, wherever you put them on your salary
Yes.
scale, they're not going to be in the upper left.
Correct.
All of a sudden, your ancillaries become
Very high.
substantial.
And the Peak 8 grant caps out at 70,000, and that is not too high on our salary scale. So we may have $20,000 of their salary plus all of their costs.
And the perception that we're bringing on someone that's a cost neutral, it is not a cost neutral. And so there's this feeling you should go after that because it's less expensive, but it's still bringing on expense.
Correct.
Preschool Promise is covering the full head count, right? Or did it?
You will actually see on your financial report that there is actually a cost in our expenditures. Preschool Promise is
For this year.
this year about $90,000 over budget,
That was the
and
second teacher,
next year
correct?
it's unfortunately our staff costs are a little bit higher than the grant cost. Yes,
But that one's at least covering most.
it is right there.
And that's kind of the tipping point of Preschool Promise, because
Yes.
if you don't have enough slots awarded to you, you're going to have too much FTE in your teachers and your classified staff to do it. Whereas if you can get a lot of slots, and I know this isn't Jervis, but like we have 47 slots in Jervis.
Wow.
We're gonna have 50 next year, so we're the largest single site in Polk and Marion County.
Yeah.
So we generate a significant amount of revenue through Preschool Promise. So we hired 10 people at our preschool.
Economies of
Plus a few
scale
others.
work, right?
It really is.
Yeah.
So there's a balance.
Kim,
Yes, Phil.
on high school programs 1131.
Yes.
FTE drops basically 10. Costs remain basically the same. Is that all COLA?
It is COLA.
Really?
We also need to think about these, unfortunately, the reductions that are made are not your highest paid staff typically.
Say that
Je-
one more time, Kim?
When there's a reduction in force of
Oh,
your
gotcha. Yep.
less senior
Yep.
staff,
Yep.
it may not be quite at the average teacher cost.
Correct.
So yes, that is an actual, number of what those particular staff are going to run us next year in their position, on their salary scale, with their step, with their COLAs. But yes, the reduction of 10 staff at the high school is definitely going to be felt.
Kim, we talked a little bit about the teachers' contract negotiations going longer and then having to go back and pay the retro, and it was kind of hard to judge what that budget was going to be for that. But do we build into the budget some sort of cost for increases? And then my second question to that is, when is the next contract negotiations coming up and we've got money set aside? And what is that? Is that considering a 3% increase or a 5%, or what are we anticipating?
Absolutely. So for the last contract negotiation, for all contract negotiations, right, when it's not settled, you do need to give a best estimate of where the overall increase is going to come from. And a lot of times it's in salaries, but it's also in insurance, and it might be in, other benefits through. We have a lot of time card or supplemental pay items for a lot of our staff. So unfortunately, the projection, as all budgets are, the projection for where that contract was going to end up was not in line with where it ended up. The other unique piece with that contract is it didn't end up at, okay, everybody went up by 5%. There was a complete restructuring of the pay scale. We had some people that went up 2%, and we had some that went up 14%. So there was an across-the-board change in that structure. The assumptions or the projection that was made just did not support where it settled.
And how do you feel about the upcoming contract?
So for the next expiration for our licensed is going to be June 30th of 2025, so at the end of this fiscal year that we're planning for. So this budget is built on knowns. That is the beautiful part about the salaries and benefits, short of unemployment, which was a estimate, but of course it's going into our escrow internal service fund. We had more information to build this budget in terms of salary and benefits than we have had in a lot of years. So that was extremely helpful. It will be something that will need to be very carefully discussed and considered of what that 2025-26 budget will need to accommodate as far as a projected change in total compensation. We really need to look at it as total compensation because it's not always just salaries. It could be in different areas. For our classified staff, their current contract will expire June 30th of 2026, so at the end of the 25-26 school year. So again, that's another piece that we need to look at. Contracts are one thing. PERS rates are very concerning. The early estimate we received was that as of July 1, 2025, we will see a 5% increase in our PERS rates. So the 25-26 budget needs to prepare for that. And we will have bonds expiring, at which time your PERS rates will adjust upwards again, most likely. So that is definitely.
So that'll be a very important question when the budget committee gets together, hopefully next May, of what are the expected costs so that your bargaining team has parameters in the bargaining sessions of what are the parameters that have been allocated for cost of living increases.
Because bargaining will start in the spring.
Bargaining
before
will
the
start
contract ends.
hopefully April of 2025.
Well, and then do you get some sort of report from the actuaries about about PERS and about their health insurance and what, hey, we probably need to allocate $1.10 for health insurance increases, or, you get that information?
PERS actuaries do some, again, wonderfully nerdy reports that are a blast to really dig into, and you think, how did they get to this? But they do some fabulous projections, and some of it's a little morbid. They're talking about how long people live, death rates, and how long are we paying this pension, and some of those things. So they do provide even extended projections because it is such a large impact on every state entity, right? You're talking police and fire, you're talking state workers, you're talking school districts. There's a lot of people impacted by the PERS system. As far as health insurance rates, we all know health insurance premiums continue to go up. The amount of costs that the district bears is dependent on what is in a bargaining agreement at that time. So those costs are controlled through the bargaining process, but of course that is a benefit. As rates continue to go up for our staff, of course, there's a need to help cover that burden.
So that leads me to this question then. So we're saying we're gonna have $1 million in reserve. We know that the COLAs are generally 3% a year, right? Is what we're trying to catch up on. What is the average COLA that we've been bargaining at the last couple?
So,
if we're just saying, I know that because we backtrack some of it. But what is it supposed to be?
So this year, after applying the COLAs and the step, so we gotta remember, you not only have a cost of living, but you have a step. We came in at about 7.5% increase per person, per
But
dollar.
for not, that's not for each year, we're saying combining.
Yep, that's
Each year.
each year.
So then what percentage of that is the general fund?
Of our staffing, about 80% of our staff are in the general
I
fund.
guess I asked the wrong question. What
Sorry.
dollar amount did we jump to go into for the general fund to pay for that COLA? Because I'm trying to see, how much do we have to
2.4
get
million.
to for the next round of COLAs?
Exactly.
2.4 million. That's what's in this budget.
Okay.
That's with a reduced number of staff.
And that
Right.
was across all funds, to be clear. Our
Across all funds.
salaries went up 2.4 million
Okay.
from 23-24 to
Okay.
24-25. If 80% of the 2.4 was in
So,
the,
what I'm trying to understand, so we need to get essentially every year 2.4 mil at.
No, every year it goes up
it's gonna go up because
They
it's a
went-
percentage.
They went up 2.4 with the
So-
reduction or before the reduction?
with the reduction
After
in
the
staffing.
reduction.
We're
After
gonna
the
go
we
to
still
a
up
million
2.4.
Yeah.
next year, that's our goal for our reserve.
Right?
And then the next year, we gotta try to get to 5.
Well,
The next, right?
Yeah, but you don't want to plan on spending reserves on that. So here's the
Yeah, how
balance.
does it work then?
Because, well, that's a great question. We're still trying to figure that out 30 years later, after they changed the rules. So, but honestly, so in the old days, the budget committee actually set a tax rate, and every one of them could be different across the state. So Measure 5 changed that. So while you get to vote on the tax rate tonight, it's already set for you. You don't even get to change it, right? But it used to be that every community would make those choices. Every school community would do that. So we were talking about earlier, the 4951, that's a 2% increase, essentially, from what we got last year to this year. And our costs are going up 7%.
Just on salaries.
I'm not a
$15.
mathematician, but if I were, that's a differential of about 5%. So where does that come from? It comes from reducing spending in other areas. Other areas might be the number of people we have. So back to the funding question you had before and the challenges we have in the state and the revenue not coming in, we're going to continue to see a reduction in force, just generally, statewide, with enrollment going down. And so, yes, and so when I put in this budget message, something I want you to think about 2 years from now, it's because I'm worried about it. Not just here, but in every other business too.
Yes.
Those are all
Our
costs that are going up.
In essence, our administration going forward is going to have to right-size our staff every year.
Every year.
Well,
Every
That's-
okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also like, hey, if we had 6 high schools, they'd be pretty expensive. So you consolidate, so you have one high school. All the students go to one location. We have a lot of schools. There's a potential that consolidating schools, and, I mean, there's more than just cutting staff, that decisions, not easy decisions, but things that can be done to run more efficient.
Right,
Well,
but
all that will
more,
be on the table, for sure.
right, but more efficiently means you're just reducing staff.
It all comes down to staff.
Right, so
yeah.
when you're closing a school, you're just saying, I'm just gonna move, some of the kids are gonna go somewhere else, so
Sure.
yes. You know, that's part of this conversation we
Yeah.
had, but it's important it's important to look forward to understand that your not just your salaries are gonna go up, but your associated payroll costs. And as you saw earlier, a couple of times that it had gotten missed, that's a huge hit to your budget. So and then on top of that, the paid leave organ we were talking about before, on top of that, so each one of those things are those percentages you have to be paying attention to and to understand whatever you're going to be able to do to fit within your revenue. And that's a big challenge. And so bargaining is part of that, but so is the money coming in, and so are the things that are out of our control, like PERS, like FICA, all the rest of the things that we don't have any control over. So those are the concerns.
But what's really great is every school district has this problem, right? It's not just.
Well, I don't know if that's great, but yes.
Well, right, so, I mean, you can
Misery
definitely, I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of, years of experience and knowledge in multiple districts in
Right.
this room, right? So why are we having such a difficult time where our neighboring districts may or may not, right?
Well, and it's,
Well,
yeah,
you know,
right.
Yeah, I know.
philosophically.
Yeah, but that's a great question, and I would say that, and I want this to sound scary, but this is all really a delicate balance.
Sure.
I won't say house of cards, but it doesn't take very many mistakes to really end up in a bad place. So let's say, when we were talking about earlier, the estimation of your local property tax. If you estimate that, let's say you just got it wrong by $1 million. Well, that $1 million you're paying back, but they're doing that 2 years later. But what happens if you negotiated a contract or you had some other costs or you increased something else? You don't have $1 million. So years ago, when I first started in work, they had 2 or 3 things that were like that, and they weren't huge, but they had a small ending fund balance. They made a couple mistakes along the way, and all of a sudden, when I'm paying $400,000 back to the state, I don't have $400,000. So what's that coming from? It's coming from people. So it's really delicate. Like, when we look at this budget, and when I was saying it was tight earlier, and actually I appreciated Hillary, I'm sure it's been said a lot, but this is like tight. But it's true across the state, and you're right. And that's why we're having these work groups to talk about revenue and funding formulas and other things like that to create some kind of normalcy, some regularity. We don't have a lot of that. And then with these increased costs, the PERS, I'm glad you brought that up, and other things, these are the big challenges. So yeah, it's not just us. We're all on this kind of ship together in Oregon, in the state
With
of Oregon.
Washington State too.
Yeah, and Washington, the same thing. And they, so this is a grand revenue issue, but these are the things that will cost us.
Multiple districts across our area, as you've probably seen in the news, are have gone through rifts, layoffs, budget cut. I mean, it's pretty well publicized. Multiple districts, our neighboring districts, are going through that.
Laid off, 400 people?
What number, I don't want to jump the gun from
No,
salary,
please.
but we did talk about buildings and the risk.
Yes.
I just, as we're talking about salaries, I'd like to just shift my gears on what number, is it 2574 or?
So facilities, buildings are gonna be in the 254X area. So 2540 is the parent for what we call operation and maintenance and plan.
Still in the general fund?
Still in general fund, yes. Almost all costs for buildings come out of general fund. 2540 was the parent and was used for years. And you'll notice that there's been nothing budgeted for the last 2 years. It's because we are breaking it down into 2541, 42, 43, and 44 to try to get a better handle on how much of it is custodial maintenance work, how much of it is grounds, how much of it is truly repairs and maintenance. This allows for better analysis of our building costs, better breakdown. So it takes time to make these shifts within the budget, but you can see we have a flag on it. Watch 2540, don't let anything get in there, because the minute something gets posted into there, it's on the books again for 4 more years per the budget document. So, you'll see that is one area that you're not seeing a lot of reductions. You will notice 2544, which is our general maintenance of our buildings. There is a reduction because we did have a couple one-time projects in 23-24 that will not be happening in this budget for certain. We will not be having any special projects, any planned projects. So of course those are reductions, but they are not a reduction to the needs and the service level. Those are reductions due to one-time anomalies in the budget. But 254 function, or the 254 question mark, as our system puts question marks in everything and we can create these masks. That is where all of our facility costs land.
I don't like page 45, knowing that we only have like the $1 million, I've had an opportunity this last year to be a sub, to get into the schools, and I'm really sad to see, the security starting to get picked away. When you're in that middle school and you're walking from point A to point B and you see all of the ways in which someone can do some harm, now we're eliminating the security when we don't have near enough money. I'm preaching to the choir, but this is the second most important thing behind the staff, that I'm just, something's gonna happen with our schools. There's not enough money allocated, and where are you gonna get it, right? Your money tree, but page 45,
I have to clarify that one, because that is a concern as a board member. I'm assuming we're moving somebody to middle school. You're saying we have no security at middle school next year?
there's
That
the dean of,
was
the
a
dean of students.
There's going to be a dean of students, but the reduction of the campus monitor was identified.
Okay, thank
By
you.
administration.
Did not know that.
Yep.
Significant.
Okay.
Is there no longer a contract with the police department? Used to.
We have one school
Yeah, we
resource
still have a
officer.
We do have one, okay.
Yeah, we have one.
That
That's-
is, again, a
that's-
purchase service. Yes, that is, we do have an officer that we pay monthly.
It rotates between the schools.
We pay like half the headcount, right, on that.
I believe it's a full-time, based on the bill, I hope
Used to be
that's
full-time.
full-time.
We pay I believe we pay three-quarters of the
city
budget
should
salary, so we pay for the
decide.
9 months.
Got it.
Budget
Okay,
committee,
perfect.
Yeah, we pay for
city
9 months.
share
Perfect.
that. I can't remember what percentage it was.
But it would be
There
a
is a bit of
full-time,
sharing, I
then,
know
not
that.
during
Yeah, I
school
mean,
days. Okay.
Because the rest of the time when we don't school in, that officer is
Is in the community.
in the community
Correct.
doing regular.
Correct.
I'm really starting to, get nervous on the liability that we're posing. Not only with safety, like literal safety, but the liability of, and I'm, again, preaching to the choir, but penetrating on that middle school. I'm concerned that something's gonna happen that we're gonna be like, gosh, and we have, I don't know what our liability insurance looks like or any of that jazz, but, trying to get that school fixed is, we
Yeah.
need more money in that regard.
Insurance or not, the safety is a different
Yeah.
question, right?
Yeah.
Insurance is on a structure or replacing objects, but yeah, student safety is difficult.
Yeah, and that, the building also, and I know that there was a lot of process and there was a thing to go through forward with a bond that pulled back. There needs to be serious consideration of that again. And I think that part of this building, this ending fund balance and thinking about that building will melt into the earth at some point, right? It's just old, and they just get old. And so I think it's really for the board to consider going forward and thinking about that again, because that building is in terrible shape. I've been in it too, and I know that. And you can't just, materialize $138 million. I just, boom, here it is, right? That's not gonna happen. So you are gonna have to consider that, because the building, or you'll have to think of something else, right? Maybe there's a different place to put the children, but it's, at some point, that building must be replaced. And I know that was a painful thing to stop that bond process. It wasn't the right time in that moment, but
Sure.
it's not something you're gonna be able to wait on very long. That building, it really does need a replacement. And so that's something that's, that has to be on the radar, because then when you're building new, you are building in safety features, you're building on all the rest of the pieces that come with modern facilities. And that building, it's time, and you've got a space for it, and you can do it, and there's all kinds of other plans, but that should be at least revisited and had discussion at the board level about that looking next step, because it's not repairable. I mean, you would be spending good money after bad to just try to prop it up, and at some
You
point.
still have an old building with security issues.
Yeah, and it'll still, if anybody's ever done any remodeling, as soon as you open up that one wall in your bathroom, you're like, oh, wow, I guess I get to redo all of it. So, and it's the same kind of thing at the middle school. So, and I'm sure that architects would tell you the same thing, or even engineers say, nope, you're now going to spend the same amount or more to rehab an old building. So you do have to look at that building. We can't do it in this budget, but it is important for the board to consider going
It's
forward.
beyond a
into next year.
budget issue. It's
It's not.
capital.
It's not a maintenance issue. They're just
Right.
old. It's time, so.
So where is, in the budget, basically, the maintenance department?
Page 45.
Page 45, 46, 2541 through 2544 functions.
Okay.
So it's basically $200,000 more this year than, if I'm reading it right, I'm looking at 2542, 200,000 on, just averaging it, more this year than last year on another year older building times, however many buildings, kind of going to where Max was talking.
Yeah.
Because the board decided not to close any schools, correct? Online
Correct.
schools,
Correct.
that stuff.
So
is that enough, I guess is my question.
sure. So we did reduce one grounds person. So we lost a grounds person position, and we also reduced an assistant director of facilities out of that budget. So we made some reductions there, but
And that came from the salary
correct.
bucket, right?
Right.
This money is for actual, if you have mold in a building that you have to redo, we have $200,000 more
actually within, so specifically 2.5, you're looking at 2.542. That is custodial and maintenance services.
Which.
So line, the first row, 100, that is your salaries. They went up a little over $100,000. Benefits went up. Purchase services are up, as well as supplies and materials. So those purchase services are going to be calls for, repairmen or things that we cannot have a staff member to take care of.
What about 600 other objects?
The $850,
No, that's $348,000.
What function are you in?
Function, service area, direction.
2541, the 600, I have a cheat sheet.
I'm just curious, like.
Yep. That's going to be insurance.
Okay.
So the supplies and materials, sorry, I'll stop talking after this. Supplies and materials is the line item for the entire district at $164,000 to fix something if it breaks?
Supplies and materials would be more our toilet paper, seat covers, paper towels.
Where is
if something breaks, you're going to find it generally in the 300 series across either 2542, 2543, and primarily in 2544. Repairs and maintenance primarily fall into 2544 on page 46. The 300 line, we have $367,000 for that on line page 46.
I was wanting the same question, so thank you. That's what I was trying to find.
And recall that we had additional projects that were in the budget for 22, 23, and 23, 24, which is why those numbers are in the 700s originally. So those other projects we won't be doing. So 367 is closer to what would have been budgeted had those projects not been underway.
But those other ones, those were planned projects, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you could still have an unplanned project that could bump you up.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the figure crossing for no major.
And if any of these budget lines have room, it's going to be in this area. We must be able to operate our buildings safely for our students, and that is an area that hopefully we have, excess at the end of the year. But we do have to make sure appropriations and budgeted funds are there for things to happen. Should we have an absolute meltdown of something, then that is where this budget is a live document, and we are going to need to come back and say, we are going to need to reallocate between our
Or you go out for a loan, or you go get a loan to complete that project.
We've done that. Like we're paying, we haven't paid that off yet.
Nope.
We still haven't paid Schlater Street off.
We have not. You will see that in our debt service fund
Okay.
discussion.
So it's hard to tell by the numbers here, but based on what you've seen, you think that's gonna be, is that equivalent to what the trend we've seen in the last couple of years?
That is higher than what our expenditures have been when I exclude the projects.
Thank you.
Yes, that was an area that, as the year goes on, I mean, you hate to bet because something could happen May 30th, right? And you've reallocated those funds, and now what do you do? But that is an area that we definitely need to protect the students, and there could be, we have to budget for emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then at some point, as you're looking forward into these things, you get through next year, you begin to consider what is your roofing plan long-term? So do you know which one's next? Because when you have hundreds of acres of roofs and how much those cost, and then you also think about parking lots and paving, and those things are not inexpensive projects. So whether you want to rely on a bond to do that is one thing, or you want to have some kind of reserve fund that you begin to build into, say we can fix, we have a plan that every so many years you're going to be working on a roof. So they just take some effort and some forethought.
So a few other things, pointing out, page 50 is where you're going to find, unfortunately, a very large expense under 5120, short-term debt retirement. That will be the repayment of the tax anticipation note in December of this year. So if we think about that, this general fund budget is $53 million, it includes a $4 million one-time expense. So if there's any bright side to this, that we've been able to balance this budget with a $4 million one-time hit, coming into that. So I shouldn't call it a bright side, but I was very, very nervous for many days calling these two going, I don't know if we're gonna make it.
Some of us also did not sleep for those days.
But what you're really doing is paying this year, next year. You know.
You are. So essentially, though, there's $49 million of expenses on these pages without that $4 million expense. So, but yes, you're right. Otherwise, the beginning fund balance would have been negative $3 million instead of plus $1 million. So in a sense, it's an in and out, yes. Any other specific questions on general fund requirements? I know that's really our biggest bucket, if you will, of things that can move around.
The seismic grant, that's totally in different funds. That's
We're
later.
almost
Right.
there.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
This is a great explanation, by the way, Jenny.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Kim.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, let's move on to special revenue funds. This is a fancy term for grants and contracts and things that we get funding for that they tell us what we can do with it and what we can't do with it. So I apologize, my labels didn't get expanded, so I will explain. The first orange bar is local special revenues, followed by blue state special revenues, federal in green, and then others in blue. State and federal funds definitely account for the majority of that. All of these funds begin in the resources side on page 2, and funds that begin with a 2-0, that indicates that those are federal dollars. So you're going to see our title grants. You're going to see then our IDEA grant in 208. And then we have 209, which are miscellaneous federal grants, and I highly, not a big fan of those because that's a lot of work to deal with federal money for $5,000. I mean that in the best way, but the complexities of federal funds are the administrative cost, let's go with, balancing federal funds is difficult. So, and then after that, we find our Fund 210, which has been retired. This will be the last year we have to include that page in our budget. As you can see, we haven't been using that fund since 21-22. And we're up on pages 9 and 10. I apologize, guys, up in the revenue section. We do have a Fund 230. I've retitled it Vehicles to Avoid Confusion. A lot of people look at it and say, wow, your transportation's only 21 grand a year? No. These are our own transportation vehicles. In a sense, this is another fund in which we take care of our mini buses, the Type 20 buses that are the shorter white buses out by the district office, a vehicle for our facilities and maintenance vans, that sort of thing. So that is what that fund is used for. All funds that start with 25, we are now retiring 250. It was a big pot of a whole bunch of state grants, made it very difficult to balance your grants. So now the student investment account grant, which is a very sizable, very, very beneficial grant for districts. We're projecting nearly $3.6 million on that grant, and that is from an estimate provided from ODE. We anticipate that to be very, very close. The 252 high school success, 253 for preschool, 254 for CTE. So the 25s are going to be our state grants, with 259 being what we affectionately call our junk drawer for state grants, and we use a 3-digit code at the end of all those accounts to identify which state grant that is. So that could be our Peak 8 grant, that could be our re-engagement opportunity grants, that could be, we have quite a few in that bucket. So we've dedicated fund numbers to grants that we anticipate being ongoing and things that'll stick with us. The early literacy grant actually is a new grant that just started in this current fiscal year and is going to be incorporated into the integrated guidance. So it will be blended and braided with your SIA funds, high school success funds, EIIS, Early Intervention Indicator System, some grant, and so, but getting you to use those funds collaboratively. So honestly, in these special revenue resources, they are determined by the state as our grant agreements come in. A lot of these figures provided here, we may know our grant amounts for certain if it's a 2-year grant across the biennium. Some of them we don't know our grant amount until the grant agreement arrives, or we're still waiting on funding on certain state grants right now for the current year. However, the expenditures that go along with these resources, they can only happen if the grant revenues come to fruition. So if a grant doesn't come in, there's clearly no expenditures. But for purposes of a budget, we must have the authority to spend those funds should they show up. So within the special revenue funds that we are anticipating, those start on, the requirements start on page 52, outlining between the special revenue funds where those funds are going to be used. Majority of it does go to also fund people, and we have over 70 FTE assigned to these special revenue funds. Primarily, student investment account, high school success, preschool promise are where your staff are going to be.
And those primarily federal dollars?
So these are going to be, if I go back, it's looking at it on my screen. The blue is the state, actually.
Oh,
So
wow.
all of those that we're talking about as far as, SIA, high school success, and preschool promise, those are all state grants. The other large portion of FTE funding does come from title and IDEA. The IDEA funds are used solely for staffing. That is section 611 and 619 of the IDEA grants.
By chance, are the state funds, federal funds funneled through the state?
There may be a federal program that funds the state, but they are considered state funds. If federal funds funnel through the state, oftentimes then they become federal funds, and we get a CFDA number, and they go on our CFA, and yes, they're.
There's a cat tax.
I was gonna say, isn't the SIA the cat tax?
Yes.
So that's 3
Oh,
million
okay.
of it.
And high school success was Measure 98, and preschool promise is through the DELC, Department of Early Learning. They changed their name this year. So, yes, lots of agencies to collaborate with. So do we have any questions on our special revenue funds? Again, one key I did want to point out, and I failed to do this while we were, failed to ask while we were in the general fund or talk about this, but a lot of our staffing in the budget right now may shift between either funding sources. We may decide, for instance, right now to build this budget, we moved, I hate to say this, but moved a bunch of counselors and mental health support into the SIA plan because that is currently what our community engagement feedback suggested that we focus that plan on. As we get together in the coming months and our administrators look at it, we may move one person from this bucket to the next, but in the end, the costs are defined, the FTE are defined. So we may see that there are FTE reductions on here in intervention remediation. Well, it might be because somebody is actually coded to alt ed right now and they really should be remediation. We've had so many shifts among staff that there is going to be a refinement of exactly which instructional function they might be in. I just want to be transparent about that we want to make sure that our staff are coded for what they're doing so that we can actually go forward with that. And that will involve an ongoing process with, we're hoping our budget members will continue to engage with us after the June 30th and after we get through the summer and we start finding out exactly where our schools need their staff. Our principals were given allocations of staff and advised these are your staff, where are they best going to be used within your.
And so if we get grants as they come through and they're used for salary, is that then like on a temporary, so Susie Smith, who was RIFT as a counselor, as an employee of Silver Falls, we got a grant for 2 years. We're gonna go for 18 months to Susie Smith and say, hey, we've got, maybe they don't know this, but we've gotten a grant. It's good for 2 years. Is it then on a like temporary 2 year, they don't come back thinking they're fully employed again, correct?
I will defer to HR on that one.
It's actually, it's a contract.
So it's
Be
a contract.
careful not to.
It's
address
a
certain
contract.
people.
So if we got a brand new grant and we were unsure of its certainty, and it was a program like Jackie was describing that we might want to try, we might post for a temporary position for 1 year, but you've got pretty tight limitations on how you can do that. So if we are grant funding a position, or we're funding a position out of a grant and we can't afford that anymore, then we are making a reduction somewhere. So those positions are not temporary just because they're being grant funded.
Is it communicated on a handshake to that human that gets the position that this is not?
Not necessarily. I mean, we have the right to assign employees to their assignments. So when new positions come up, or like if we post something, as an internal position, they'll oftentimes ask, is this a grant-funded position?
Sure.
Am I going into something that I may only do 1 year? They're not worried about losing their job.
Right, because they would just go back to the FTE
They would go
that
back.
they came from.
Yeah.
I would think with decreasing enrollment, priorities will change, and that position could be funded, another one eliminated as well, so, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there are some staff who are funded by multiple funding streams. They might be, there might be 6 parts to that person. They don't know that they have a job doing X,
Right.
but they're funded through multiple streams. Yeah. So it's a challenge because we can't just keep them temporary for a while. We can do a contract with a contract, so purchased service through something else. That's another way to do the grant dollars. And so a lot of ways to make that happen. But
And do grants just come in and go out throughout the entire year, or is there a set period of time where you can find a grant, apply for one, and get it? Like
All of the above, yes.
Oh, seriously?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, your target is always moving.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
I will be,
I mean, it would cost money, but ideally you would retain a 0.2 for like a grant writer.
Right.
That and their sole
All
job
they do is look for
would
these
be to
things.
look for grants.
Yeah.
And if you could afford them, they'd look for them and write for them.
Yeah.
But if you can't afford that, you could pay a 0.2 or something along those lines for them to just look for them and then give options to your administrators that would turn around and then write for them. But that's going to cost money.
We did have that position at
Internship.
one time in the
In a
city.
sense.
Graduating senior.
Yeah, and it didn't,
I mean,
it didn't pay for
There
itself.
you go.
pay for
I
itself.
mean,
Yeah,
that's
it didn't.
creative. But
And
That's
I
good to
think
know
we've
it.
had it we've paid for that service.
We've paid for a service,
For a
yeah.
service through the WSD, and again, it didn't materialize into something that
Okay.
was.
yeah, you're rolling the dice.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and grants have administrative costs, the reporting, the compliance, there is a lot to them.
A
I
blessing and a curse.
am not at all saying that they are not critical. We see how critical they are to our operations when we were looking at, our total resources. But there are a lot of pieces to each of these grants. We, full disclosure, we have a very large grant that we were awarded July 1, 2023, and we've not seen a dime for yet. They're still working on the grant agreement.
Well, that's going to be our Hail Mary right there.
I mean,
It's not a Hail Mary because it is
already in the budget.
it is in the budget.
Oh,
It's
perfect.
profit still.
We are being told it's coming, so.
but the grants are tough because like a building principal could apply for and get a $2,500 grant from the Blazers Foundation or something like that, which $2,500 you can stretch far in a district or in a building, but from a business manager's perspective, a $2,500 grant is a whole lot of time and detail for not a lot of money, and so.
And we've had to have those conversations because somebody ambitiously finds something that they want to go out to get $2,500, and we're probably spending more than that in taking care of it, even though a Blazer grant might be fun for those students, but it costs more to take care of it.
Yeah. Kim, I've got a pointed question. If we can go to page 72,
Perfect.
talking about Fund 251,
Yes.
student investment.
Yes.
There's a lot with curriculum development, assessment testing, structural staff development. It seems like we've zeroed a lot of that out. Can you unpack this page for us, please?
So we are in our 2000s. So in the past, some of our high school success has been used to purchase new curriculum, to purchase, we do have some still professional development time in there under the 2240. That's what instructional staff development would be, to improve the skills and knowledge of our staff. But the 2210 or 2230, those are used in different areas. So 2230, I see we didn't budget anything for 2324. A lot of our assessment and testing will live in the general fund per se. The high school success, we're in student investment account, I apologize. Those funds have really been prioritized towards people rather than things. to make sure we are meeting the responses we're getting from the community engagement, which is a required part of the SIA plan.
You have any more, Derek?
No, thank you.
I've got one, Kim.
Yes.
Special revenue funds.
Yes.
Where's the high cost or disabilities fund?
That is within general fund.
It's in the
So,
general.
yes, so when our high cost disability.
Where is that in here, on this, is it in this report somewhere?
Yep, you are going to find the revenue for it on page 1, and it is going to be in bucket 19, remind me, is it 19?
32.99, right?
32.
Isn't that what we did the?
Yes, so 32.99 is where our high-cost disability, you see $680,000, I believe, on that one. And what I have done, I've got my notes here.
You budgeted correct.
I have, so this is.
Yeah, you budgeted correctly.
Okay, we'll see next May, right? No, so what I did, high-cost disability grant, that number is coming from, I'm estimating a positive adjustment for the 24-25 school year of $850,000, meaning a revenue incoming of $850,000. In looking at our numbers, I do believe we could see a $320,000 negative adjustment for this last year, meaning we may have expected we would get 45 cents on the dollar when we just got 39 cents on the dollar, and it actually is trending downward, and we may see 34 cents on the dollar reimbursement next year. We do need to account for, we may not see as much revenue as we anticipated. So the 530 of that number, 530,000 is for high cost disability grant, and the rest of it in 32, is that the number we have on that one? I apologize,
Or
guys.
even
680.
32.99.
General fund, $32.99, so the 680 is 530,000 for high-cost disability grant, and I have 150 in there for, it's not coming.
These are important to me just because I knew there was two things in the district that were basically, were going pretty negative on it. It's like we didn't almost have a choice, food services and this. In my head, like I tried to, now maybe as far as what we were expecting revenue-wise and what we were actually getting. So I just kind of curious how you budget for something when you're expecting to get a negative $600,000. I mean, I don't know. How does that work?
So
Well,
that,
you carry a reserve of $1 million, and hopefully at some point you got $5 million to cover the things that are, you can't completely budget for, you know? You can't plan for, you try to do your best, and then you take out of that.
it's very difficult when you have these moving pieces, right?
Yeah.
So, because the high-cost disability grant is always talking about 2 years at a time, right? You're talking about you have a positive and you have a negative. Same thing with our food service fund. Actually, that is Fund 299. That is another special revenue fund. And, our food service fund, if we go to that page, you will see I currently have a fund transfer going into it in the 24, so page 20, I apologize. So on page 20, we are showing an interfund transfer into that account of $298,000. I will say that does not fully recover that account. That will be a multi-year approach to work with that program.
So can we go back to the high-cost disability?
Yeah.
So you have to think of high-cost disability as like a rebate program, right? So you're going to spend money to educate students, to provide them with the services, and then there is a bucket of money that the state holds, and that bucket stays the same. Depending upon how many people apply for that rebate program, they divide up that number. So that number, cents on the dollar, goes from 65 cents down to 58, down to 38, down to 34. So you don't actually know what you're going to get. Right? You could budget 0 for revenue, and then whatever you get is gravy, right? You can look at it that way too. So it's, I think in the past what happened is that there was a bet that those would stay at the numbers we had seen prior, which was not a bad bet. I mean, it had been at a certain number, but as needs, as we talked about before, needs of students have gone up. We have more kids who need more of those things. more people are applying for those dollars, which means fewer dollars available to go around. And so counting too much, and that's part of Kim's calculation, is we're gonna pretend we're not gonna get as much as if we get more, great, but if we get less, then it's gotta come from somewhere else.
And it's costing more to educate those students than it did 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Correct, which is
So
back
your
to the
net cost
revenue
is gonna be
conversation,
higher.
right.
So it kind of hits you. You have less money in the pool going around because there's more people applying for it and your costs have gone up.
Correct.
In the last one, on this one, Kim, on 15, can you explain something to me how we have a negative balance? So it's the CTE grants? So
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, I
how are
had.
we negative in a grant?
Yes. So we are talking on page 15, and we are showing a negative beginning fund balance. And thank you for bringing this up. I failed to have my note up here on this. This is a grant that was awarded for this fiscal year, and we've been told that the revenue will not come in until next year. So originally, we had been advised the revenue was coming in this year, and we went ahead, and there are costs in that grant that are occurring right now for our students to go to a national championship, and we decided to, I decided to allow that fund to go negative,
Okay.
to allow those students to go. Because originally, we said we are not spending any money out of that until the money comes, and that's, I will own that if I have to go, but we have been affirmed that those funds are coming. It is tied up in a state agency office right now.
And what group of students was that?
This is for, I believe that is our Skills USA group through our CTE program.
Good decision.
Thank you. It's very hard because it goes against everything in my being
But we
to
do know
spend
it's
money.
coming. We know it's coming.
So
We are
We've been told
guaranteed
it's
it's
coming.
coming.
are there
I just,
consequences for them to do this? I mean, I
No,
think there would be for us.
no, there are not.
Because
I will-
didn't somebody say we had to pay something back?
I'm-
Didn't we have, didn't we had to pay back $600,000 or
That
was
was
that
in the
another?
high-cost disability.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Josh, it's okay to be frustrated. Let me give you an example. In November, when I spoke to my board of the WESD, I explained to them that we were still missing 65 of $68 million in contracts that we were owed. And we were considering getting a tax anticipation note to make payroll for December and January because we are funding these grants out of our ending fund balance to provide services for lots of students who have high needs. And so we were reaching a point where we were not going to have enough money because the grants hadn't come in yet. We are still missing millions of dollars in grants. It is June. We were supposed to get them, the grant started in July of last year. So it's not just, it's us, and it is frustrating, and that's part of this whole thing. Kim obviously made the right decision in this one. It's hard, though, when you're going through a budget deficit and then go, yes, I'm going to deficit spend one more time because I know it's coming. In this case, these do come, but there is no, here's the other part of that. So that $68 million should have been in my account because then it would go to the LGIP, the local government investment pool, and I would be earning the 5 or 5.5% on it every month. Well, I didn't see that money, which means that the department actually realized those billions of dollars in LGIP interest rate. So that's another conversation too. Like, so now you've held on to them because you're taking forever because it's got to go through this department and that department and the Department of Rubber Stamps, and it's got to come back around. So here we are months and months later. You've now been earning 5 or 5.5%. Pretty good. I don't know how your savings accounts are earning, but they're not at 5%. And so we're also missing on that revenue that would also then help us fund other programs. So there's a significant issue. This is obviously not a huge number in the grand scheme of a multi-million-dollar budget, but it is. We feel your frustration, and we can just tell you that there's no penalty to them for not getting us the money they owe us.
So yes, I do appreciate you bringing that up, and I do, I take a lot of heartburn over that, but it definitely needed to happen. We definitely are guaranteed that is the 2 years of revenue listed there at the 83,000, or excuse me, yes, the 83,000 that we anticipate bringing in, but we allowed the $25,000 advance on that essentially.
That's why the bottom line's so small too. I tagged that as well.
Yeah, and there are kids going to a national competition and they've
It's-
earned it, and
They've earned it.
we know it's gonna come.
We can't say next year. Yeah, do it next year. No, that doesn't work.
All right, other questions?
Just two quick ones, and I'm sure that, I don't want to get in the weeds too much, but when I look at 2150, your SLP services, I'm reading a jump in FTE from 2 to 5.
So which
And,
fund are you?
Where am I at? I'm in-
Page, maybe just page number.
Yeah,
down at the-
41, page 41.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
So,
21.
yes, so that is
21.
currently what is in the budget for
Sure.
speech language, or speech pathology services. This is another one of those unique, as we talked about earlier, our Willamette ESD services, that we can either purchase services or receive revenue. Traditionally, we had received speech pathology services through the ESD, and then we brought those staff in-house, actually in 23-24. So while we only budgeted for 2 in 23-24, we did have 5 on staff this year, which means while our costs went up, we also received that revenue through the transit dollars on the ESD, so it becomes a cost-neutral piece. They became our employees instead of contracted employees.
Okay. And then I follow up and, again, further into the weeds a little bit, but conversations around specifically like SLP, but there's some others for kind of the itinerant services of shifting to a teletherapy model for some where you really only have to pay about 0.7 of it because you don't have to pay and that's something the ESDs had to wrestle with a lot because most speech language pathologists are moving virtual services, which you pay an hourly rate, call it $80 an hour, but then if you factor in what you would pay an employee
And benefits.
and benefits and the whole lot of that, there is a potential cost savings shifting. And something like that doesn't usually work for your students that are highly impacted by disabilities, but for those that are communication disorder only, there's a lot of research that says teletherapy actually doesn't make that big of a difference versus in person for speech. So stuff like that, just the LSP sandbox of, I'm sure those conversations were had, but.
And conversations are ongoing
Yeah.
about those service levels and what we can do to streamline that. Do you have anything you want to add on that, Brandon? I know it's ongoing communications. No pun intended.
I mean, that's something we've thought about. We haven't really gone down that road a lot, and I think part of it too is because part of the reason we brought our own in-house is because we've had such a big increase in the students identified for speech language impairment like everybody else, and also with autism with our kinders coming in, and so, I mean, not opposed to it in some circumstances. And I think that also could make some sense for maybe some of our smaller buildings in the footprint of our district as well.
You have to, don't have to factor in travel costs anymore.
Exactly.
And those kind of things.
I think for us to just be figuring out the eval piece
Sure.
and how to make that work, so.
Yeah, okay.
Appreciate that.
All right,
Any
anything else
further?
before we move on? All right, can we have next the supplementary financial information?
Let's finish up our funds really quick. I promise these
Okay.
will go quick. We'll call this our supplementary information. I apologize,
Sorry, I
I
thought you
didn't
were
look
done.
at the budget very well. Debt service funds, pretty straightforward. These are your 300 funds. So these are going to be the bond for Silverton High School, the bond for the Silverton Middle School work, and our PERS bonds, as well as a small bond we have for the Senate Bill 1149. That is an energy savings program. So our resources for that generally come through our general obligation bond tax levy. They come through payroll assessments for the PERS bonds. Again, just like we charge ourselves for unemployment and put it into that internal service fund, that escrow account, we charge ourselves for PERS bonds and put it into a debt service fund to make those semi-annual payments. And we, of course, have our requirements. This is our principal and our interest on those bonded debts. Any questions on debt service? I promised that would be a quick one. It's pretty straightforward. We know exactly what our amortization schedule says that we are going to pay, and we do that. The one fortunate thing is we're able to adjust our charge in payroll for what our PERS bond payment is going to be. Then you look at payroll and say, okay, what percentage do we need to charge ourselves to have resources to pay those amounts? I will say, unfortunately, in a time of reductions in staffing, that did create a little bit of an increase then, of course, on what that tax charges to ourselves in that, so. After our debt service fund, 400s are our capital projects fund. This provides resources and requirements to provide the spending authority for capital improvements. This would, as shown in this document, would provide the budget authority for the Silvercrest seismic grant. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Dr. Morlock for a moment on this one.
So, and this was actually brought up before, so the Silvercrest seismic grant, looked into that, qualified, have applied, were approved. And now they're gonna hold it because they want to see as we go forward, as we were talking about going through major reductions, and talking about possibly closing schools and things of that nature. So they wanted to make sure that we were going to keep that school open. They don't want to give us money to rehab a building that we're not going to use anymore. And so we'll continue to have those you'll all continue to have those conversations. Kim Kellison and Kim Dowd will continue to have those conversations in the future. So it's on hold. So the reason it's in the budget here is for us to have spending authority, for you to have spending authority to be able to do that if it comes in. If it does not come in, then it's a wash on either side. So it's important to know that's something that we had gone back and forth about, and one of the concerns we had was, as you know, sometimes projects say, well, it's going to be this much. If it ends up costing us more, we don't have more to put into this project, so we didn't want to be on the hook for that part of it. We did do some work with the engineers that had done some of the estimating already, and we looked a lot better than we thought. So that grant is on hold by the state. They're sort of waiting to watch the dust settle on this, and then have a conversation. They'll connect with Kim Kellison coming in and Kim Dowd, the Kim squared, Kim on either side, and they can beat up on them a little bit. But they'll have that conversation then. But it needs to be in the budget, so there's a spending authority for it. So that's why that's here.
Is it in the whole 430 fund of 2 million, is that all a grant?
100%,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep.
So, I just got an Indy question when you guys are done with this one.
Okay. We just want to be clear about that one, but it's in the budget, but we're not guaranteed to have the grant, but we have to have the spending authority if that does come
I
through.
appreciate you clearing that up, because I'm sure there's some Silvercrest parents like, when's that work gonna get done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have another capital projects question or another fund?
It's kind of the whole budget question, because I think because I kind of agree with Hillary. I don't see the 8.8, or even, I see that our revenue is the same as our expenses, so I'm
Yes.
like, where's the savings?
That's a
Perfect.
balanced budget.
Yeah.
Revenues and expenditures must always match to the dime, to the penny.
Okay.
We'll revisit where that cut, yes, must is the key. We'll revisit that here in just a second. Let's finish up with
Okay.
our internal service fund. Just wanted to highlight, I have literally just ready to close this out. Internal service funds, these are your 600 funds, and I have showing you here, unfortunately in the orange, that is our new requirement for unemployment costs.
So it's higher now.
Holy smokes.
The budgeted amount for 23-24 appears to be about double what we need, so I expect the orange in the 23-24 column to be half of that when you see it as an actual.
Did the state legislators see this chart?
Well, so.
We'll be sure we can send it to them tomorrow.
You know, back to what Jackie was talking about before about collecting data. So part of finishing off this year, and part of the work for OASBO is also getting all of the school business officials to actually get them this information, because this is the kind of information that when people are testifying and they're doing the public theater of the process in Salem, they don't have any of this data. And we all said, well, this is going to be bad, it's going to be bad. Well, how bad is it? And so part of this now is about collecting the data and then bringing the expertise to say, well, here's an opportunity for you to see in a graphical format, this is what it has cost us.
Now, part of that is the reduction in forest driven too, correct?
So of this number
Yeah.
here, 800,000 of this increase is due to the new legislation and will continue every single year.
800,000.
800,000. I have budgeted another 600,000 due to the reduction in force. That amount relies heavily on the duration of benefit that someone must need before they're able to be reemployed. The legislation will be an annual added cost.
So even without the RIF increase, it's doubled, more than doubled.
I'm a little, I don't want to say concerned about the 800,000. We have to estimate how many of our staff are going to take advantage of the benefit. There are some staff that are not, that have expressed that they're not going to take it, apply for the benefit, and then there are some that definitely will. So, until we start seeing our charges come through, I'm not sure what to do. This has created a significant administrative burden for the Oregon Employment Department. They only have 9 employees for every single school employee in the state. And every single I should say classified, but every non-instructional employee that works for a school district in the state of Oregon is now eligible for insurance, unemployment during break periods.
So that would include like Christmas break, summer break.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving break, spring break.
I did a little bit of research when this first came up a few months ago, and I was shocked how loose the rules are now for gaining unemployment.
Yes, and that is despite having a job to return to, despite having health insurance all summer, yes.
You say non-instructional.
Non-instructional staff.
And even partial weeks.
So
The definition is
that?
outlined in ORS.
Thank you.
And the benefits are dependent upon how the employee applies.
With very few people there to do any auditing to determine, to safeguard.
The validity of the
The validity of the claim, with only 9 employees to do that work, the ability to validate that is
We had
very limited.
17 people apply just today. I received email. Every application requires a response from the employer. So I expect to see probably, 100 over the next 2 weeks and another couple hundred.
Do we know how many non-instructional employees we have that qualify? Like, what's the total number that could qualify for this?
So with RIFs and everything,
Yeah.
probably close to 220, 200-ish,
200 could, and 17 have today.
just today alone.
just
though.
today.
Yeah.
Today.
Well, we're still technically employed, but they are furloughed. I mean, it is a furlough day, so it's, but it's
Is it more expensive to RIF them then than it would be to retain them somehow?
definitely not. We do not have any associated payroll costs associated with unemployment. It is not PERS eligible. There are no taxes on that. And it is a limited period of time. It is 26 weeks at that point. However, it is key that is part of getting people off of our recall list, right? Because we would much rather pay, them to be here working with us and get them a job back, get them that security, that knowing that they get to get back into their buildings that they love, work with the kids and that sort of thing. So we had 2 very large meetings with all of our staff, with state agencies coming in that can help them with reemployment services, can help them build resumes, help them with interview skills, help them with all those things. And those I felt went very well. It was a definitely service provided. Do you need assistance with, cost of food for a while, or are you, yeah.
And sorry, this should concern us to some degree, right? Just because it has this like unknown potential to be extremely expensive.
It could cost more than that.
Yeah.
I will say the timing of the invoicing allowed this to be 1.4 million. The actual accrual of expenses within the 24-25 period will be higher than that, but due to the timing of the bills from the state and when they're due, I factored in payments that would be due within this fiscal year.
But to your point, just the idea that the substitute issue, the paid leave Oregon, Senate Bill 819, which deals with abbreviated days for students, that it's an unfunded mandate. A lot of these objectively are good, but they were, for the most part, a lot of the decisions were made in a vacuum without people that are the practitioners and the executioners of it. Their voice was not part of the process. And so when it has filtered down to this level to say this is how we are going to roll it out, we are now seeing last year and this year how complicated it actually is, that I think there were a lot of elements that were not necessarily considered at that legislative level,
Guarantee.
which absolutely, yeah.
In Kim on paid leave Oregon, you know, I have a couple that I've done. I can guarantee you that pot's probably empty.
I am very concerned about that.
So the rates for us are gonna probably go up, because the amount of people pulling out did not get put in. And so, I'm getting some emails from Oregon Health Authority about it, and, so there's a good chance, just like we saw our rates up for our power bill jump. I almost guarantee that paid leave will still be voted in, but it's gonna have to significantly increase our taxes to do it.
One thing we got a kind of a late jump on to try to mitigate this, and Joe had some of his team members help us, is we set up a system where we were able to offer, because we have summer work for, like, in the tech department. We have some some maintenance and food service.
No maintenance
No
this year,
maintenance,
but
okay.
food service and tech.
Basically offering employment opportunities so that if people, and some said they would take it, which is great because we need the work to get done, and those who deny it, then we do have the possibility of denying unemployment. So the problem is you can't go out there and offer that to everybody, so you have to have a number you can live within. You gotta be really careful about how you go about offering it. So it took the three of us, you know, quite a bit of time to figure out the system, offer the work, make sure we're validating it, but it was every effort to reduce that number, get the work done that we can do so people are getting paid to work and perform the functions that we need during the summer. So.
And the flip side of that is, it is a fabulous opportunity for people who have, I shouldn't say people, everyone who's been impacted by the furloughs to potentially regain some of that impact. So that was key, that we offered it to our staff before posting it as a public opening. Absolutely key that we provide our staff that opportunity. So finally, just providing this for you, that at some point in this budget process, one of the things that will be done is the setting of the tax levy rate. Our permanent tax rate, as was mentioned, I believe, earlier in this meeting, it's set for us, and it is set at $4.5458 per $1,000. We also have the tax levy, which is for the bonded debt for this district. But those are going to be the rates for this year once we get to that point. So, ending with questions and discussions, I think we've done a fabulous job, hopefully, of being able to kind of get to them as we've come through them, but definitely want to open it up to any further questions and discussions. Before we do that, I'm going to see if Jackie has anything she wants to add. Perfect. She's kind of been my mentor through this, as I've been a little, to say the least, overwhelmed. And so just want to thank Jackie as well as our team, so appreciate you being here.
Kim has done a great job, a fabulous job.
Thank you, Jackie.
Can we go back to the last slide again? So I'll leave
Absolutely.
the rates again, sorry, thank you. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I had written it down correctly, thank you.
So, Kim, how do I see exactly the cuts, except for the back page on FTEs? Like, I'm sorry. I'm
You
new
are
to this.
right on that final page in the requirements report that shows 476 FTE to 418. Now, keep in mind that is the
What page is that, Kim? Sorry.
page 123.
It's all far back.
Gotcha.
Yep.
But the number, I don't see it reduced, like the overall, like, it shows our budgets proposed is greater than,
Shows FTE.
I guess, I don't know. I see the FTE reduction, but I don't see the dollar amount reduced.
You are so for budget in 23-24, there was a $76,982,000. The $76 million was our budgeted 23-24 for 476 FTE. The proposed expenditures are the 80 million for the 418. Again, the budgeted FTE is what was budgeted, not what was in the buildings when we started reductions. Regarding the 8.8 million, coming back to that, In Joe's presentation, we highlighted what those numbers were. That $8.8 million reduction is made up of, it's difficult to call it a reduction, meaning we have to, it still is a reduction, but we have a $3.9 million TAN. We have a $1.4 million unemployment increase. We had a $1 million contingency in this budget and a $2.5 million increase in payroll costs. We had to drop by $8.8 million to accommodate those costs in this budget. If none of these costs were here, right, this $8.8 million that I just outlined, then we wouldn't have had to make that reduction. But we cannot meet these liabilities, these requirements this year without making that $8.8 million reduction. Did I explain that?
Yes, you did great.
Well for you? Thank you. Absolutely. Are we all looking for a bottom line to go down 8.8? In our minds, that would be what we see. We had to find $8.8 million in expenses to reduce to build a balanced budget this year. That's maybe the better way to say that.
Kim, I wanted to ask you about the property tax revenues just on page 1 of our resources report.
Okay.
So I noticed that we're projecting to receive, and I think you said that you use for projections, use a 6-year average.
Yes.
And obviously last year that was off by a significant amount, and I don't know if we know why that happened, but I was just looking, we're projecting to receive about $250,000 less than projected. And then we're projecting, or for the proposal of 24-25, we're actually looking at about $500+ thousand more than we'll actually are projected to receive in 23-24. So it just, I guess I'm just questioning that based on what we've received in the last year. It seems like it might be over projected, but.
I would say it's close, and this is one of those things where it is an estimate at a point in time. And your state school fund, between that and your state school fund payment, it's a zero sum.
Right.
So what needs to happen is in November, December, once the majority of your taxes come in, at that point, the district needs to look to say, what percentage of that did we get? If we expect it to be more, we need to let the state know. If we expect it to be less, we need to let the state know. And then your state school fund revenue will change at that time too, then to balance that out. So those two things together will go up and down, and it's always an estimate. And so you're not gonna get that money and have to pay it back as long as you are monitoring it throughout the year and making those adjustments with ODE so the correction happens in that fiscal year versus waiting until having a negative adjustment the following year.
Gotcha, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, we have supplementary financial information. What is that?
I apologize, I had not seen the budget, so I would say that your supplement was fully covered here.
I don't know what else to
apologize.
You didn't see the agenda.
I did see I've seen, yeah.
The next
I've seen
3
the
hours,
budget.
we'll be going deeply into this.
Yes, those are the next, yes.
Dan, is there anybody online for public comment?
Well, let's give them a moment. We have had 6 viewers throughout the evening, so
We'll wait just a minute then.
if anybody would like to make public comment, please use the raised hand feature. I'm not seeing any.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to have question discussion. I think we've already done plenty of that, but
I just have
one more.
one.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and because you're the one that would know about this probably the best in the room, that property behind Robert Frost, what is the estimated timeline on the sale of something that size that you'd expect for that?
Well, that's really, really hard to say. I mean, I would hate to make a projection on that, but I think it's gonna take, just in terms of getting it divided and being legally able to be sold, that's gonna take 5 to 6 months. The application's been turned into the city, but they've got, a substantial amount of time, I think 120 days to turn that around. They may turn it around in 30 days, but they might not turn it around for 120 days. And then it still has to go through the county and the survey and all of that. So, you know, I'd say the soonest possible would be to actually sell it and receive funds would be 5 to 6 months from now.
And that's if somebody's interested.
Absolutely.
And also what type of land it is and if there's any impact or wetlands or
Well,
environmental impact.
you know, typically a developer would make an offer and they would have due diligence time, and then they would look at it during a, you know, a 30 to 45 day period, and then they would purchase the property. And then they would still, obviously, they would take a long time to actually develop it, but they would probably purchase the property, you know, without extensively long contingency time periods.
And as that property belongs to the school district, I mean, I'm sure it's just like a house, there's some type of bargaining process in the price.
Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Goes through the very same process as you do for a house.
Are you
nego-
interested in it,
negotiate,
Josh?
you go to-
How much you
Just
got?
trying to figure out how many years it's gonna take to get that money back in our budget.
I mean,
Well, it depends, you know, it's a function too of how cheap do you want to sell it, you know, and conversely, how much, you know, what's the optimal price to put it at to where you know, maximize your return, and at the same time, you don't prolong a sale, you know, out to years. So you try and find that sweet spot, and I think one way to do that is, and I think this is true, Dr. Joe can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, one way to do that is to price it at kind of what the high end of what your expectation might be, and then the market really will tell you whether or not that's a reasonable price, and you can always adjust downward.
Has it
Right.
been evaluated at all yet or no?
Yeah, so we actually went through a process with a commercial real estate person who went and actually did the buyer's, I'm sorry, not brother, it's the broker's opinion of value, BOV. So they gave us an opinion of value. The challenge is that those are often based upon lookbacks. So these properties sold for these things, and there was a range, and that range took us all the way up to 9 million and all the way down to a few $100,000. So the range was unfortunately very difficult because of the kind of property. Now, it's fortunate that that property, while it has a school overlay or a government overlay, if that, as that's divided, it can be R1, which means it can be just residential homes, which is the best property. We looked at other properties too. Remember when I was talking about some of the other ones that
That's right.
basically can only ever be a school or have to go back to being farmland, and
Right, that's right.
and that's why that difficulty. So it's a function of how much. I mean, do you want to do a quick sale for less? I don't think it's necessary. We haven't built. That's why I said it at the outset. We didn't build this budget based upon, you know, let's get that thing sold. It's not a good way to do it, and getting the maximum value out of it, or maybe not, and waiting for it. So and that'll be something you continue to discuss. But it's an asset that made sense, and at the same time, we've presented tonight a balanced budget. Yes, it has been painful, and yes, it also gets you back on the path. So I would look at that as not even gravy. I would look at that as that's going to be a major bonus, but that's not something that you count on. You operate here, and then, you know, and then if you get that, great. But yeah, the mechanical number of days, you know, 90 days is going to be probably a minimum, but you got to sell it and negotiate. So 6 to 9 months probably at the earliest.
And I'm really unschooled in this, but is there an excise tax benefit down the road if that does sell out into residential? I mean, that
Absolutely.
would be another piece of revenue to
Yep.
consider. As well as if it's residential housing, you're looking at families, you're looking at children, you're looking at increasing your ADM across the board.
We hope, unless they mail
But
these.
that's-
Yeah.
But again, that's all
Right.
just.
And that's another one of those projections in this budget, excise
Yeah.
tax for next year. Do we anticipate a lot of new construction? I didn't go very high on excise tax with interest rates the way they are, building costs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely not, you know, not our expertise, but you kind of know what's going on in your community. It's helpful to know that. That's not just this community issue right now, but, you know, excise tax, we had to plan on a little extra general fund support to the bond that excise tax goes to.
Senate Bill 1149.
Thank you. Yes, it is our lighting project, yes.
What's the sweet spot for FTE in the district? What's goal?
You mean currently or in the future?
To operate with all the contractual requirements and with SPED and alt ed and like, what would be it?
There's no magic formula on this, and I'll tell you why. The population changes. So you were actually mentioning before, you have a whole set of new kids who come in who need a different kind of services. So some services cost you more than others, like special education services. Certain ones will cost you more. I would say that we're not at the sweet spot right now.
Too high or too low?
We're very low now. You were too high. So currently in the 23-24, I'm sorry, I'm telling you that now. 23-24 school year, far too high, just in terms of numbers, because that's not revenue that you'll ever realize. We have cut way back, and part of that, and if I look just at those requirements that Kim was listing earlier, that's in the budget message, if you were not going to be paying for what is not in this year's budget next year in your TAN, then you can look at some of those dollars as being available to you. I think some of the unknown unknowns though right now are, where are we going to end up on this unemployment thing? I'm concerned, all of us are concerned, because we don't exactly, because we're shooting in the dark here. So I think that whatever that sweet spot will be based upon what our other unknown costs are going to end up.
So then, the second part of my question then, if through the 24, 20, so this next year, you have certified and non-certified staff leave willfully, and I don't know how to ask my question. So the end goal is trying to get the 1 million to be more, obviously. You have fourth grade teacher person leave, and you've riffed someone. By contract, you have to fill that, or you have to at least attempt to fill that with someone.
No, only if we decide that we can't afford the position, then we would just not have that position available. We would just collapse it. But the way that we have tightened up and done class sizes, it's likely we would, especially in positions like that. If we're talking about a classroom teacher, those class sizes have gone way up. It's very likely we would replace that. But if you didn't, then the rest of those dollars would then go to your ending fund balance.
So going back to where we started, you basically alluded to, if we need to grow or want to advise that this 1 million is more, it is going to come from personnel.
Most likely, that's your biggest.
Right.
That's your
And
biggest
it's the easiest
pot.
to pay.
Yeah.
But yet we're too low at 418. We would feel uncomfortable to not hire if someone left because of where we are on a ratio perspective. So it would be foolish of me to think that if something happens or we want more than that, to say, pull more people off the front line.
And there's a balance there too, because when you're pulling them from the recall list, you're also not paying your unemployment on that, right? So there's it's maybe not a savings, and they're also more likely to be a lower paid employee, even in the same classification, because they're lower on the seniority lists, right? So there's another realized savings too. So if somebody leaves who has many more years of experience than somebody who comes in who has fewer.
And you'd save money by bringing them back on the unemployment. That's what you were just
Correct, and you'd also save the unemployment. And so there's a balance in there, and I think, as next year's budget will be far more, it'll actually be more difficult to add, because you're gonna have to make some actually tougher choices in some ways. Like, you're gonna only add back a certain amount, and what are the most critical add backs? And that'll be a pretty large conversation, but it's somewhere in the middle. But you have to get to a place where your expenditures match your revenues, just in terms of what you can count on coming in. And some positions will be more important than others. But every department and every school, they've all lost something. In some cases, they were just positions that they didn't have for a little while, they just weren't filled. Well, they still had a person that used to do that, but we couldn't hire somebody for the last couple of months. The other places to save, though, when I walked in the door, I made everybody really happy by turning off all the P cards, all the purchase cards that they use for small purchases and whatever. But by doing that, we saved thousands of dollars in a really short amount of time. And then we figured out that maybe we didn't need that group of paper clips, and then but there were some things that had to happen, like prom was happening that week, and so like, hey, we still have to get balloons. Okay, we can do prom. But by making some really hard choices early on, you can save some of those. And so when I put in this message, and I don't mean to sound too cheeseball about putting everybody's shoulder at the wheel, I mean that. Like, if don't buy that box of paper if you don't need it, right? And every time you don't do that, times 400 and some employees, 418 employees, if we're not buying a this or buying a that or getting just one more of these, Each one of those dollars goes into the ending fund balance. It's not gonna be the same as,
And the principals of these schools are being held accountable to ensuring that we're that rigid.
well, and that is where, that's the other part of the trick, right? So that's the agency accounts we talked about, that some of them had been overspent. So part of the work next year is for everybody to monitor what they have in their accounts. So we fixed some of those. We have some other work to do in terms of what it looks like in the building. But yeah, that's the next thing, is everybody has to be accountable. Everybody has to watch the dollar. And you can do it, and there will be a savings in some of those things. But we did reduce, was it 30%?
25%,
25.
each building's
I told you 30, but
discretionary.
she took only 25. I'm just kidding. No. But 25% is a pretty significant reduction in your, account at your building for whatever things you might do it on.
My gut feels is unemployment's gonna not be as big an impact as you're showing, but you have to budget this way.
Yeah.
Because people will get jobs.
Yeah.
That is the goal. The quicker we can help people get jobs, the more of that can be either ending fund balance or reallocated to needs that come up. We
Right.
have students move in that need a one-on-one aid. We do have students that need an entire staff member with them just for that one student. That is extremely costly. And we don't know until they show up. And Brandon walks in and goes, "You're not gonna like this." Oh dear.
And we
But-
have pulled people off. We have offered recalls. So we had when we were done with the reduction process, had been unable to fill a halftime counselor position at Silvercrest, and so somebody who had been interested in that and wanted to take a reduced to 0.5, we did that, moved somebody to that position, which then allowed some dominoes to happen and bring somebody off the recall list that actually ended up going to be teaching here at the high school. We've had 2 requests for job shares, so 2 people going from 2 full-time people down to 1. So one of those was very easy to know. Yep, this is the next person that is going to be a kindergarten teacher at Central Howell. Those kind of things. But the tough part about the add backs is there's a second one, and then kind of like looking at the position, going what do we need most out of here? It's easy when we know that we just reduced a kindergarten teacher at Central Howell, let's say. We're going to bring in another Central Howell teacher or person there. So those add back positions are going to be really difficult because there's already people saying, departments saying, we can't do this with what we have.
Right.
And so really trying to prioritize when these opportunities come up to go, what is the best use of our dollars, which department needs it the most. Joe warned the principals that you think this is hard, the add backs will be harder because everybody will have something that they think they have to have.
Indispensable.
We're getting that now.
Sure.
Yep. Yep.
We're hearing that.
Monday was a good example.
So I want to, since we're in the discussion phase, I guess I want to just make a couple comments. I'm nervous that, and I know we went, I think, as much as we could, but I'm nervous it's not enough. But we can't ask anymore. But with the COLA rates, interest rates, all of it, cost of living, I'm very nervous. Second, we have to figure out why people are disenrolling from public education. If we figure that out, we can then plan to bring them back. I think if you're not first, you're last. And so if we can figure it out better than other people, we can continue to be a significant leader in the state. So that means if people are going to an online charter program, like I know they're going to Eastern Oregon, why can't we do that here? I know people that are doing that in our school district. Why are they not doing that charter program here? So, I don't know, we gotta figure it out. Because if we lose another 50 kids, that's a significant amount of money, that's another rip. Now you budgeted to have those, another drop of 50 kids based on this, right, Kim? Like those numbers are based
About
on
40,
this
yep.
projection.
48.
But there's a good chance, they're gonna come back, so, I think we just have to listen and make good moves, and, think we're gonna be in a good spot.
We currently have, as of June 1, 127 students in this district in online schools.
And comparatively, historically, you don't know?
I'm not.
Yeah.
That's
That's
pretty new.
Yeah.
That'll-
It's, so the second question is more of an existential question. I think that there's a broad thing, but I'll go back to your first one. And the reason that we've made changes in the reports that we're providing to the board for your finances that you're getting now on a monthly basis. And I think that these are the ones that will help because they do a projection, where you are, where you think you're going to be. That's why we've moved this report to give you more detail into that. And also because you can look at it and go, I'm going to ask a question about something in yellow. There's a lot of yellow on this one, so I'm going to start at yellow number 1. I'm going to go, why is this? So the reason for this is to arm you with more information to ask better questions of your superintendent and of your business manager, because this will help you stay on track more. This requires a certain amount of work and it gives a certain amount of study, but it also is far better detailed than you've had before. And she'll continue to do those kinds of things that move forward, but I think it is important to recognize the work style change, Kim's expertise in doing this, and of course the support from Jackie to get us launched into this. But this is about providing the board with better information so you can make better decisions and have better questions for your executive leadership.
No, it's very good, very helpful.
Yeah.
And this is page 1 and 2 of 4 or 5 pages in this report. So this is just your general fund. Soon you'll be receiving another page with your special revenue funds broken down by fund, and another page that identifies where we are at in our appropriations to determine if we need to do a supplemental budget or not. So it is all in development. In addition to that, we've identified features within our accounting system that are going to not allow requests for expenditures to even leave a school office if it's not there. The way we currently are set up, it's very complex at a certain level. We've identified a way we can group budgets together. They may overspend on paper, but be underspent on paper clips. It's going to allow them to keep buying paper because the paper clip money is still there. But when that pot is depleted, sorry, you spent it all on paper, and now what do we do about pencils?
And that's kind of one of that checks and balances for site-based versus district-based budgeting, the accountability for your principals, it's possible. It's just, a level of oversight with the clarity you're getting with this document, just sending it down in the other direction of having those accountability conversations bi-monthly with your principals of how is this going? What are we doing? And then a deeper dive every quarter. I mean, things along those lines. It's certainly possible. It's just putting those things in place and then holding to them.
It sounds like you're not that far off from our site-based budgeting model we used several years ago.
It's just in a different
We
fashion.
really are on a modified basis of it. Exactly.
I know our budget committee has pretty limited authority here, but I would really encourage our board and our administration for next budget year to really seriously look at a modified site-based budgeting similar to what we had prior to Paul Peterson coming. Is there a need for another meeting? I think we've covered everything personally.
Right.
All right, I'm not seeing a big desire to have one.
I don't know
So-
what I would ask if we had
Okay.
to do what we do.
Do we have a motion?
After being down
We're
for
all
3.5
getting
hours, we're gonna fall over.
I remember providing a little bit of pushback and they had to come back.
I don't recall.
Is it less than $1 million?
There's
For
a
carryover?
percentage. If there's a major change.
It was under
I'm
4%.
sorry, what was
I
that?
remember that, but I don't recall what the number was.
For a supplemental budget, you need it if you go over 10% of an appropriation category, and you will be receiving a supplemental budget at your next budget meeting. At your budget hearing, you'll also be approving a supplemental budget for fiscal year 23-24,
Yes.
in order to bring you into compliance with Oregon budget law.
That will be at the June 26th budget hearing, the supplemental budget.
Right. So, okay, so this time I go ahead and accept a motion.
I move that the Budget Committee of the Silver Falls School District approve the 2024-2025 fiscal year budget as proposed.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, Debbie.
Okay. Hillary's gone. Wally,
Yes.
Max,
Yes.
Creighton,
Yes.
Jenny,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Josh.
Yes.
Is Jennifer still here?
She says she's still on. I'm gonna see if we get a text message. Is
Owen?
there?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
Jennifer is a yes. All in favor.
All right, thank you. Any other business?
We need to set the levy tax rate as well.
Oh, thank you.
I move to set the tax levy at the permanent rate of 4.5458 per thousand assessed value and approve the tax levy of $4,576,740 for the proposed of retiring bonded debt of the district.
Second?
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the tax rate? All right, Debbie.
Wally,
Yes.
Max,
Yes.
Creighton,
Yes.
Jenny,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Jennifer, yes. All in favor.
All right, thank you. I'd like to publicly thank Jackie for helping us out. I've been attending a lot of meetings, and you've been pretty instrumental in getting us through this, so thank you. And then also to Dan, congratulations on your new position.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to say I appreciate everybody here tonight too, and just, very fluid in how we've had to do this, and bless our the flexible this year, that this has been an unprecedented year, and everybody's flexibility and not getting things on, when we normally like to have them out and have 2 meetings potentially back to back, and even potential of a Friday night. Like, I just want to say thanks to everybody, I think this format was also really good too. So Kim, Joe, Dan, Jackie, everybody involved. Brandon, appreciate you being here tonight too, to add commentary on our special services. That this format, I think, was really, I know, beneficial amidst the chaos that we're under right now. This was extremely beneficial, and had the format of how we've gone through this, because I think it allowed for open dialogue and just to really chew on some certain things. And I think something we want to think about going forward as our board and our budget committee. This seems to be a really good format.
Yeah, and thanks for starting at 6 o'clock too. I think we're a little more fresh, and we got really late.
Yeah.
Tried to push through, so.
Yep.
Good call on that.
And if I could just say thank you, they're out furloughed right now, but our principals really had a lot of work to do. The 3 of us were hardly ever in the same room at the same time, depending on information from us, and I think our principals did an amazing job, a very painful job of being allocated FTE to report back to us what they needed so that we could then reallocate the staff back to them. It was a very painful process, and they did an exemplary amount of work to do that work. And it was very hard because they knew the names and the faces of what the implications of their decisions. And it's an amazing principal group, and just really want to thank them for that work.
I just want to talk to you, Kim, real quick. Cannot imagine how hard that was. Being up late all those hours. They're not just numbers, they were faces to you. And you stepped up. And I can't imagine how many hard conversations you had, text message and phone calls. And you were awesome. So I want to acknowledge the strength you had, the skill you had, and I wouldn't have been able to do it. You could. So I just wanted to thank you publicly for how hard all this has been.
I appreciate that. It's definitely the burden that I feel, you know, that, you know, we have 60-plus families that didn't choose this and it was chosen for them, and it's a huge burden, and I just kind of just kept thinking, what can I do to try to help my hometown, my community, well, certainly not here, but, you know, SUHS, of course, right? You know, and I am happy that I had the opportunity to serve. It wasn't exactly how I would want to do it, but I just appreciate the support, the patience. I absolutely already, you know, just kind of excited if I have the opportunity to continue and do it the right way next year. I hope to be here with you guys next year, not in June, and not, you know, getting in front of it, having a complete budget document with all those supplemental pieces in it. This is down and dirty. This is a balanced budget. This is what we need to do to get this turned around. It's going to be a hard year. I am nervous about that it's going to be very hard to keep saying no, or, you know, there are times that things have come up. So, but, you know, I think Silverton as a community is going to come through this and say, that's who we are. We are Silverton. We can overcome that quickly, and we can, you know, we can get ourselves out of this all by coming together. So I just appreciate all of you. So not to
I
get
think
sad.
once we're over to shock, I think everybody will pull together.
Yep.
And work. And I too want, Dr. Joe, you've been a godsend.
For sure.
To us. And Dan and Kim and Brandon, all of you. It's been amazing the amount of sanity that has actually been going on the last few weeks in the middle of chaos. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but yeah, I really felt that, that we were still functioning, and you were getting the job done and doing the tough work and what had to be done. And so thank you all.
Kim, I hope you can get some vacation time. To decompress a little bit.
Yeah, I might not be in tomorrow if we don't have a budget meeting.
Before next school year.
As your supervisor, I direct you to take tomorrow off.
All right, anything else? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.